Amendment 91, Baroness Penn.
My Lords, I rise to move my Amendment 91 in my name and the names of the noble Lords, Lord Storey and Lord Knight, and the noble Lady Baroness Cass, and speak to my Amendment 106, also supported by the noble Lady Baroness Kidron. My Lords, I'm conscious that I am the warm-up act to the debate on Amendment 94A in the name of my noble friend Lord Nash, also in this group. But I do think it's right and appropriate that before we discuss the issue of teenagers and social media, we think first about the early years. Not least because Ofcom data shows that the proportion of 3 to 5-year-olds using social media has risen from 25% in 2022 to 37% in 2024, with 1 in 5 of those using it independently of their parents. My Lords, this data is reported by Ofcom, but without any comment or action associated with it. And I would be very interested to hear the Minister's response as to whether high-quality age verification that may accompany the Amendment 94A in my noble friend's name would be welcome in restricting use amongst our very youngest children also. But, my Lords, it's not just social media. 85% of 3 to 5-year-olds go online, with 1 in 6 owning their own mobile phone. 98% of 2-year-olds watch television, videos or other digital content on a screen on a typical day, averaging around 2 hours each day, double the WHO recommendation, and amongst the top 20% of 2-year-olds, that figure averaged 5 hours per day. Such levels of usage go against everything we know about what is needed for good development in the early years, where adult-child interaction is paramount. It goes against everything that we know about how much physical and active play our youngest children need. It goes against everything we know about the importance of outdoors activities and the development of healthy eyesight. And the reason this is so important is that we know that early years are such an important time for a child's development and impact them much later on in life. And that is why this government has rightly placed so much emphasis on its early years strategy. And in that context, the government's announcement last week that it will produce guidance for parents and carers on screen time of preschoolers was incredibly welcome, if overdue. But that guidance will only have a positive impact if it's high quality, reaches parents and helps change their behaviour. So can I ask the noble lady, the Minister, if she can provide any more detail on the early years screen time advisory group that the government is forming to develop this advice? My Lords, we have the chairs and the terms of reference, but group membership and planned meetings remain to be updated in due course on the government website. Given the guidance is being published in just 3 months, it would be useful to know more detail on this. Can I also ask the noble lady, the Minister, what plans the government has to publicise this advice once it is drawn up, to reach parents where they get their information and ensure join-up across government, particularly with the Department for Health and Social Care, so that it is integrated into the Healthy Child programme and available through health visitors and GPs, not just through Best Start in Life family hubs. And given the importance of joint working in this area, would she be happy to commit to a joint meeting between the two departments and experts to develop this further? My Lords, turning to Amendment 91, the welcome action on guidance for parents makes the lack of any proper guidance and policy within early years settings an even greater outlier. There is policy around the use of technology in schools, but in nurseries, often the most tech-rich environments as practitioners use tablets to log so much of a day's activity, there is currently nothing. This is deeply problematic. It's problematic from a child development point of view, where the use of YouTube in early years settings has been described as one expert as ubiquitous, not just replacing the all-important adult-child interaction, but also using content that is too fast-paced for children to learn from, and actually stimulates their fight-or-flight response, capturing their attention, but in a way that is associated with hyper-alertness, hyper-wakefulness, and later-life affective disorders. And it's problematic from a safeguarding point of view, most starkly illustrated by the tragic case of Operation Lanark, where 18 nursery-issued devices were amongst the almost 70 seized from the home of a nursery worker charged with the most horrendous cases of abuse. So I'm incredibly grateful that the Minister and her colleague, Liv Bailey, the Early Years Minister, both met me to discuss this and the parental guidance issue discussed earlier. And I'm really pleased that the government's intention is not only to update the voluntary guidance for settings on the Help for Early Years platform, and as part of their review into the non-statutory curriculum guidance, development matters include information on screen time and digital literacy, but that they will also include it in the next update to the statutory Early Years Foundation Stage framework. And I would be grateful if the Minister could not only repeat this commitment today, but also give a clear timeline for when the amendment to the EYFS will be made. And in undertaking this work, will the Department consider not only the impact of screen time, but wider use of technology and devices in early years settings, both by children and practitioners, and considering child development and safeguarding issues? Screen time is important, but based on research published about current levels, of screen time use, less is better is an important message. But the evidence also shows context and content matters too, and I hope the government can commit to incorporating this in their approach. And I should also be absolutely clear that those settings who choose not to use screens or tech in their setting should be free to do so. Tech is not needed for good child development in the early years, but if it is being used, it should be informed by our understanding of early years development and accompanied by robust safeguarding practices and clear policy within the setting. My Lords, it's essential we get this right, and I know there are a host of education, health and research professionals who stand ready to support the government in their work. And can I thank Katie Potts at the Digital Standards for Early Years Action Group, Professors Rachel Bedford, Tim Smith and Sam Wass, Birth to 5 Matters and health professionals for safer screens, amongst the many, many dedicated people who have been generous with their time to me and worked so hard in this area. My Lords, finally, I should probably explain why it's so important to get clear reassurances from the Minister on this now. I first tabled amendments on this in May last year, but there was no mention of digital technology or screen time in the government's early years strategy published in July. Guidance for parents of preschoolers was only announced in January, with no accompanying detail of a campaign to reach parents. And on the incorporation of guidance into the early years statutory framework, the Digital Standards for Early Years Action Group wrote to the previous Early Years Minister over a year ago calling for this to be incorporated into the update to the EYFS that went live last September. That call was rejected, although I've never been able to find out why. So I really welcome the government's commitment now to action and believe it is genuine, but also need reassurance that once the spotlight has moved on, work will not stop and delivery will happen at pace, in particular on making a substantive change to the Early Years Foundation Stage statutory framework this year. Otherwise, a 2-year-old that started nursery when we first debated this issue will have left for school before any change is made. My Lords, I beg to move.
Amendment proposed. After clause 27, insert the new clause as printed on the marshalled list.
Thank you. My Lords, I rise to speak on 2 amendments in my name, both tabled as amendments to Amendment 94 in Lord Nash's name. These are necessary if this House is to respond to online harms facing children in a way that is effective, proportionate and grounded in evidence. Let me be clear from the outset. I share the concerns across this House about the real harms facing children online. These range from exposure to age-inappropriate and damaging content to disturbing prevalence of grooming and exploitation. Parents are right to be worried, and Parliament is right to intervene. However, as the NSPC have made clear it is in its briefing to us all, my Lords, a complex safeguarding problem demands a risk-based response, not a blunt one-age ban. So my first amendment introduces a mechanism limited and tightly controlled exemptions to a blanket minimum age requirement. Crucially, such exemptions could only exist where there is demonstration in improved child safety, not where they are weakened it. Any exemptions would be specific only jointly by Ofcom and the Children's Commissioner. That joint responsibility, my Lords, is deliberate and important. To ensure decisions are made independently of commercial interests and are rooted firmly in regulatory expertise and statutory duties to act in the best interest of children. The amendment sets out a high evidential bar for platforms. Providers have to show compliance with Ofcom's risk age guidance on minimum age. Have full regard for UK GDPR principles. Explicit consideration of children's rights as recognised by the UN Convention on the Rights of a Child. They would also be required to assess impacts on children's mental health, examine whether their design or features encourage being addictive or compulsive users, and scrutinise the role of algorithms in content recommendations and target advertising for any products or services, including, for example, gambling content marketing. Importantly, any exemptions will be subject to periodic reviews, my lords, with powers for amendment or revocation if Ofcom and the Children's Commissioner are no longer satisfied that adequate protections are in place. This places a burden squarely on the platforms, my lords, to prove safety on an ongoing basis rather than leaving children exposed to unimagined risk. The NSPCC, Five Rights Foundation, Molly Rose Foundation and 39 children's rights and online safety organisations have warned us this week, my lords, and I quote in substance, a blanket ban on social media would fail to deliver improvements in children's safety and well-being that they are so urgently need. We already know that age limits are not meaningfully enforced, and these organisations, my lords, are well respected throughout up and down this country. And as the NSPCC estimate, more than 2.5 million children under the age of 13 are currently accessing social media in the UK. Raising the minimum age to 16 does not solve that problem. Indeed, it risks pushing children into less regulated and high-risk spaces, including encrypted platforms, anonymous forums and unsafe gaming environments. Children who bypass age checks are likely to register as adults, placing them in an environment with weaker safeguards and higher exposure to harm. There is also a real risk of unintended consequences. Safe, age-appropriate use of social media, such as family group chats, peer support networks and access to services like Childline could be lost, particularly for vulnerable children. Bans may also deter children from reporting harm for fear of being punished for being online at all. My lords, I'll briefly speak on the Second Amendment that ensures that the definition of regulated user-to-user services is in line with the Online Safety Act 2023. This House invested significant efforts in establishing a risk-based regulatory framework under the Act, and it's essential that this bill operates coherently within it. In conclusion, my lords, these amendments do not dilute child protection, they strengthen it. They move us away from a blunt, one-size-fits-all ban towards the proportionate, evidence-based approach that respects children's rights, holds platforms accountable and generally reduces harm. My lords, the public out there have sent a clear message that they want us to act. It's now up to us in your Lordship's house, but also down the corridor in the other place, to act on it. I think what we need to do is to heed the warnings of these respected organisations that have written to us all, to actually say, we hear you that there is a need for a ban, but we think we can look at a much more sophisticated model than just a simple one age limit ban. So, my lords, I beg to move.
My lords, I rise to speak to the amendments in this group, 92, 93 and 94A, in my name and in the names of the noble ladies Baroness Cass, Baroness Benjamin and Baroness Berger. As this is the first time I've spoken in the report stage of this bill, I should draw attention to my interest on the register, particularly the fact that I am chair of the Multi-Academy Trust and an investor in a number of companies, including tech and software companies. I have 3 amendments in this group. 94A is to raise the age limit for access to social media to 16. In fact, this amendment does rather more than this. First, because it does 5 things, in fact. Firstly, it raises the age limit. Secondly, it requires social media companies to put in place highly effective age assurance. Currently, many, if not most, social media companies have no really effective age assurance at 13. Thirdly, the amendment would direct the Chief Medical Officer to prepare and publish advice to parents and carers on the use of social media by children, so, if you like, the start of a public awareness campaign. Fourthly, the amendment sends a message that draws a line in the sand for parents, carers and others to use when discussing social media with children, which they are crying out for. And fifthly, it allows 12 months for implementation. My Lords, we have reached an inflection point. We are facing nothing short of a societal catastrophe caused by the fact that so many of our children are addicted to social media. Many teenagers are spending long hours, 5, 6, 7 or more a day on social media. The evidence is now overwhelming as to the damage that this is causing. We have long passed the point of correlation or causation. There is now so much evidence from across the world that it is clear that by every metric, health, cognitive ability, educational attainment, crime, economic productivity, children are being harmed. I have sent Noble Lords an evidence document prepared by health professionals which sets out over 50 studies from around the world showing a clear link between excessive use of social media and harm to our children. Jonathan Haidt now calls this evidence a mountain of evidence. We are facing a health emergency confronting our children. Since 2016, there has been a 477% increase in children's contact with mental health services, and eating disorders amongst 17 to 19-year-olds have risen 16-fold. There's been a 7-fold rise in young girls admitted to hospital with eating disorders, and the evidence is clear that there is a strong link between this and the substantial increase in rates of ADHD, suicide, depression, anxiety and self-harm among teenagers with overexposure to social media. Our teachers say it is the #1 cause of disruptive behaviour and in their view will be the biggest source of pressure for students in the future. Our children are turning up at school sleep deprived. It's clear that many are going to sleep on many nights of the week in the small hours. The NEU and NASWAT are in favour of raising the age limit to 16. The Chief Inspector, Sir Martin Oliver, is, and social media is at the centre of county lines and radicalisation. So much so that in 2025 the heads of MI5, counter-terrorism policing and the National Crime Agency issued a summer holiday warning urging parents to keep their children safe online. More young people than ever have been arrested in recent years for terrorist offences. Children are increasingly seeing real-life violent content, which only 6% of them initially look for. And the evidence is clear that people who watch or discuss violent images are, unsurprisingly, much more likely to commit crime, including knife crime. I know that some are concerned that a 16 age limit would be to the detriment of particular groups of often vulnerable children, but it is the most vulnerable children who are the most susceptible to influence by social media. The police who specialise in child sexual abuse material and radicalisation say that it is just the help forums for groups such as LGBTQ+, those with eating disorders, ADHD, etc., where the worst abusers hang out and target children. Social media is being used extensively for sextortion, and there are now even widespread cases of children hosting live sex shows for payment from their bedrooms on social media. So-called com groups are using social media to trap vulnerable children in games, such as cutting games, where the person who cuts the deepest wins, choking games which have proved fatal, or even games which encourage rape or suicide. One survivor attested to having seen multiple suicides. Polling demonstrates overwhelming support. The vast majority of parents, 75% of adults, including 75% of the Labour voters, support raising the minimum age to 16. And most strikingly, young people themselves recognise the harm. 78% of Gen Z say they would try to delay their child using social media for as long as possible. And polling published today shows that 60% of 16 to 24-year-olds, those who have most recently had the experience of social media as teenagers, support a 16-year-old age limit. And also over half, 13 to 24-year-olds, say social media is fairly or completely responsible for increasing misogyny or violence against women and girls. And there is global momentum for this. Australia has raised the age limit to 16 and Malaysia are doing so. Many other countries, including Denmark, France, Norway and New Zealand, are considering restrictions, and the European Parliament voted in November overwhelmingly for 16. Why 16? Because the 13, 14, 15 teenage years are when teenagers are the most vulnerable to influence and have a very high risk profile. Some people call this a cliff edge. I don't see that. The amendment merely seeks to give teenagers a few more years to mature so that they can deal more effectively with social media, distinguish fact from fiction, and exercise better judgment. I know that some charities, including those involving bereaved parents, would like to see an approach which favours using the Online Safety Act and Ofcom more effectively. Whilst we must try to improve Ofcom's approach, the OSA only catches harmful content once it has been seen, often by children. With 70 million child sexual abuse images out there and more being created every minute, beheading videos, etc., there is no way, even with the best will in the world, that all this product can be taken down and taken down fast enough. Our children will see it. We just want them to see it at a later age. And nine bereaved families, many of whom are here today, wrote to the Prime Minister on Monday in support of my amendment. And of course this approach would not deal with the grooming of children on social media channels. Others have proposed we wait to see what happens in Australia. But what are we waiting for? We know our children are being harmed. We know that tech companies can put in place highly effective age assurance. That is what they're doing in Australia with a high degree of accuracy, well into the 90% at the initial age gate, and then by tracking the traffic, the activity on social media, which they do for all of us, they can tell when a child has slipped through the net. There is a myth that children will get round age assurance, but that has grown up because hitherto there has been no generally effective age assurance at 13. There is also a concern that children will move to other sites, and my Amendment 94A allows for these to be brought into scope. And my amendment also allows for 12 months for implementation, plenty of time for learn from Australia. My Lords, this is going to happen. The only question is when. We have the opportunity to do it now in this bill, and every day which passes, more damage is being done to children. We must act now. Turning to the Liberal Democrats' amendments 108 and 94B and C, well-intentioned that they may be, they have been rushed out at the last minute. And surprisingly, in view of what the noble Lord Mohammed has just said, they bring into scope Wikipedia, WhatsApp, TripAdvisor, all gaming acts, many special interest and health forums, with no ability to exclude them. Whereas my Amendment 94A has that facility, which would almost certainly be used. Also, 108 has no enforcement mechanism if social media companies do not comply with the 16-year-old age limit. Their amendments 108, 94B and C seek to avoid scrutiny by your Lordship's House and the other place on what apps are in or out, and seek to delegate this function to Ofcom and the Children's Commissioner, apparently sometimes acting jointly. I don't quite know how that would work. And acting on the basis of vague criteria, creating a huge amount of work for an already overworked body and massive scope for litigation. My Amendment 94A leaves that scrutiny firmly with Parliament. My Lords, well-intentioned as these amendments might be, they are fundamentally flawed, and therefore, if you send them back to the other place, as opposed to my Amendment 94A, it will be easy for the government to knock them out on those grounds. My Amendment 94A has been well thought through and subject to scrutiny in committee. Turning to the government's proposal consultation, which they tell me will last for 3 months or so, firstly, the announcement of it on the eve of the vote is unfortunate. When will the actions arising from this consultation be published? We are still waiting for those in relation to the consultation on gender identity in schools, nearly 2 years after the consultation closed, and that issue, complicated though it is, does not involve technology or multi-billion-pound tech companies with all the lobbying at their disposal. The consultancy talks about exploring ways to improve assessing age assurance. Well, as I've already said, highly effective age assurance already exists. The government is well behind the able. They want to assess the current age of digital consent. This is in fact only one means, and not the most usual means, by which social media companies lawfully collect personal data. Again, the government is behind the able. They want to explore further intervention to support parents. Parents are arguing with their children daily about screen and social media time. They want a line in the sand now. So the government's consultation is, in my view, unnecessary, misconceived, and clearly a last-minute attempt to kick the can down the road. My second amendment, 92, is to raise the age of access to VPNs to 18, as it is clear that some children are using VPNs to get round age restrictions for gambling, pornography, and might well use them for social media, so it is closely linked to 94A. On Amendment 93, I've had a constructive discussion with ministers on this, and more discussions are in progress, and I won't be asked to be voting on this today. I urge noble lords to vote today for my social media amendment 94A and VPA amendment 92.
My lords, I rise to support the amendments to which I've added my name in the names of Baroness Penn and Lord Nash. When I was president of the Paediatric College, an important part of my job was urging government ministers that protecting and investing in children is the only way to protect the future of our country. Because, as I believe I've said before in this House, children are 25% of our population and 100% of our future. So if we fail to protect them, it's not just a moral issue, it's a financial disaster. So there are two questions we need to ask ourselves when we think about how social media is impacting our youth. First, are they at risk? And secondly, how do we eliminate or at least minimise that risk? Now, with regard to younger children, I fully support Baroness Penn's amendment, and I too welcome the planned guidance. And just a couple of points. I would particularly ask the government to give careful thought to that guidance in relation to vulnerable and disabled children who may be more limited in their abilities for alternative physical activities, so that screen time is understandably an easier default. So advice for those families is particularly important. And it is also important to think about how they're going to reach those harder to reach families or marginalised families who may not easily access the guidance. And the final thing I would say on this, following up from Baroness Penn's question about who will be on the group, the input of speech and language therapists is going to be particularly important given their obvious involvement in early language development. Turning to older children, last year my noble friend Baroness Kidron and I hosted a meeting at the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges. The meeting brought together representatives from across the medical specialties to discuss what they're seeing in outpatients, on wards, in GP surgeries and in emergency departments. And we heard about cases of sextortion, cyberbullying and gaming addiction. We were told about children who couldn't leave their bedrooms, let alone go to school, and about the impacts of that inactivity, including obesity and musculoskeletal issues. Psychiatrists talked to us about young people who'd been radicalised online and those who had learnt self-harming behaviours online. And we heard about children suffering PTSD after seeing beheadings or videos of animals being tortured. Clinicians working in emergency departments talked about young people coming in following strangulation, either as part of challenges or during sexual activity, or with injuries after being drawn into organised crime or county lines. The age range of the children presenting with injuries linked to harmful sexual practices is falling. We were told about fatal and near-fatal injuries in children as young as 13. Doctors in that room described this as a public health emergency. The Academy of Medical Royal Colleges has since sent a letter signed by every medical college president to the Secretaries of State for DCIT and DHSC about what they described as an extraordinarily moving meeting with clinicians giving personal testimony about the horrific cases they had treated. Now, my medical colleagues here, if there are any, would know that college presidents are like cats. You can't herd them. So when 23 of them, all 23, agree there is a risk, you need to be very afraid. Now, mental health problems are complicated and multifactorial, and it's very easy for academics to look at population data and say that social media is just one of a number of factors causing the dramatic rise in mental health problems. But these clinicians in the room weren't describing data points, and they weren't describing research subjects. They were describing real young people who'd suffered direct, incontrovertible harm. They knew their names, they knew their families, and they'd borne witness to the trauma and the distress. And as in so many other situations, disadvantaged children and those who were neurodiverse were felt to be at the greatest risk. So I asked the government, how will a consultation weigh the testimony of a clinician or indeed a parent who has sat by a dying child as a result of one of these horrific incidents against the testimony of a parent from another part of the country who has not gone through that experience, or any other consultees. I don't understand what extra information this consultation is going to give. I find it extraordinary to think that a meaningful consultation can be conducted in 3 months, and I cannot see how the two sides of the debate can be weighed up any more effectively through that mechanism. Yeah. On Monday evening, I spent 25 minutes online using an incognito browser page. I learnt that I could end my life by inhaling helium. I watched 2 videos of girls being choked, and I accessed a video with 10 tips about how to enhance my sex life with strangulation. Not, I hasten to add, because I wanted to do any of those things. I just wanted to see how easy it was, and it was easy, and no age verification was needed. My lords, if we think children may be in danger, we act first and we ask questions later. On the wards, if we had concerns about the competence of a clinician, we suspended them from service first and investigated later. It was a neutral, not a punitive act to the clinician, because we were protecting children, and that was paramount. When small numbers of children died tragically as a result of nut allergies, we didn't wait for our CTs. We transformed catering in schools and set up emergency protocols. And yet, far more children are being harmed by social media, and still we delay. You don't need an RCT to tell you that punching someone on the nose every day hurts, and removing the aggressor provides dramatic relief. And the word evidence-based is used very loosely in this chamber. I think it means hearing from somebody else, not the person whose views you didn't like. The amendment before us, proposed by Lord Nash, gives the Secretary of State discretion to determine which social media apps should be unavailable to under-16s, but equally to opt-in apps which she deems safe. So in the coming year, it would be possible for UK tech to have the opportunity to develop such apps. We're not talking about necessarily leaving children and young people in a black hole. But this is just a beginning. It's not a panacea, and there's much more that we can do. And if I was on an NHS computer, organisational protocols would block me from accessing YouTube or other social media apps, so there's no technological reason stopping the development of under-16s devices with national protocols which allow age-appropriate content. And with regards to the Lib Dem amendment, and the risk of potentially more young people going onto the dark web. Again, if we talk about evidence, where is the evidence that more children and young people will go onto the dark web than those who are doing so already, or that it will outweigh the numbers of children who are saved from seeing the sort of content that we are so worried about. My Lords, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. The first step was the Online Safety Act, but maybe this is the second step. And I really do welcome the fact that the government has moved from questioning the evidence to actually recognising the national concern about this issue. But our Prime Minister has said on numerous occasions that the first duty of a government is to protect its citizens, and he is right. Here and now, we have a clear and present danger to children. The first duty of government is not to consult, it is to act.
I've followed these issues closely through my work on the Online Safety Act, first as a member of the Joint Committee, and then on the opposition front bench, and now on your Lordship's Communications and Digital Committee. I added my name to Amendment 91 proposed by the Noble Baroness Penn, and I'm delighted that the government is listening and hope that ministers can give the Noble Baroness the reassurances that she seeks. Turning to the amendments in the name of the Noble Lord Nash, I first thank him for raising these important issues and detailing the harms so compellingly. The harms caused by social media are clear, both in terms of the harmful content and that they are addictive by design. The algorithms operate in a moral vacuum. Platforms' algorithms do whatever it takes to keep us on screen. I'm attracted to the government's proposal in the consultation around banning addictive design rather than a blanket age ban. That could see a huge reduction in harm for all of us, as today's University of Sussex research about doom scrolling demonstrates. But it is our children who we most want to protect. My 14-year-old at home is time limited on her phone. She is not allowed her phone in her room overnight and is limited to 2 social media accounts. This is difficult to parent, but it is our responsibility as parents to navigate it with our children. Incidentally, the 2 social media accounts she chooses are WhatsApp and Pinterest. Both are allowed under the Australian social media ban. One keeps her connected to family and friends, and the other she needs for her GCSE art. Under Amendment 94A, on my reading of it, it seems pretty categorical. It is all social media platforms, and she would be banned from both. Pinterest was implicated.
And I'm interested, from a Labour politician who I great deal respect, that there are parents who can control their kids, but it is the most vulnerable kids and the least advantaged kids who live in households where there is no discipline who are the most exposed.
The Noble Lord and I debate with great respect and friendship. My reading of by regulations made by statutory instruments require all regulated user-to-user services to use highly effective age assurance measures to prevent children under the age of 16 from becoming or being users. That feels categorical to me.
That is the point. That is the point the Noble Lady Baroness Cass made. That is the point that it would be up to the government, approved by this House and the other place, as to which apps are in and out. And clearly, it would be possible for those apps which are suitable for children to be excluded, as would WhatsApp, Wikipedia, under the Lib Dems amendment. They have drafted it in such a way, I have to say, where it would include everybody, and it would be up to this very complicated procedure with Ofcom and the Children's Commissioner to work out which would frankly be a nightmare.
I will move on. I'll try harder to read further to try and get to the same place as the Noble Lord Nash, but I doubt it. Pinterest was implicated in the suicide completed by Molly Russell. Molly's father, Ian, is thoughtful, brave and inspiring. I listened to him talk on the BBC this week about why he and countless other expert children's charities are against a blanket ban on social media for under 16s. They worry about the unintended consequences for children's safety. A blanket ban is likely to lead to under 16s finding less regulated platforms to connect online, such as gaming platforms or on the dark web. It's worth noting, according to recent Internet Matters research, that boys spend significantly more time on gaming platforms than on social media platforms. They may also turn to VPNs, which would then undermine the child safety gains of the Online Safety Act. Lord Nash's VPN amendment tries to address this, but age-gating VPNs may be extremely problematic. My phone uses a VPN following a personal device cyber consultation offered by this Parliament. VPNs can make us more secure, and we should not rush to deprive children of that safety. And a blunt blanket ban, it's a struggle not to call it a blanket ban, will also deny young people the positives of some of the less addictive social media. Young people will continue to want to connect with each other. They will want to share music, their photos, their videos, their creative content. I was of the mixtape generation, now replaced by the shareable playlist. Young entrepreneurs will want to market their products. Will they have to use an adult's account on an adult's phone and be exposed to the risks of adult content as a result? When I speak to young people in my capacity as President of Young Citizens, I've been struck by how well informed they are. They find out what's going on in the world through social media. Is it right that we lower the voting age to 16 and simultaneously prevent access to news for 15-year-olds when we want them to become well informed? My Lords, the arguments for doing something urgent and something meaningful about the dangers of social media for children are compelling, but so are the arguments to do it in a more sophisticated way. For that reason, we should back the government's consultation. I note it's a 3-month consultation. Can the Minister please reassure us that action will follow within the 12-month timeline suggested by the Lord Nash's amendment? And we should at the same time urgently review how the Online Safety Act is working. We need to retain the risk-based approach to regulation in the Act, but Ofcom's current stance of treating all children, all the way to 18, as the same is flawed. We need age-appropriate design, and we should give Ofcom the unambiguous requirement to ensure that age restrictions and guidance about social media access are rigorously enforced. And this in turn requires mandated robust age assurance. We must develop this sensitive to the digital rights of children and mindful that we don't want to unwittingly require big tech to hold sensitive data about our children. And so I would also echo Ian Russell's call for us to listen to children and young people as we make these changes. That's one of the really good reasons why we should go ahead with a consultation. I conclude by urging ministers to act swiftly, to listen to parliamentarians, but also to experts and young people, and then to act robustly, platform by platform, to deliver the ambition of the Online Safety Act, to make this country the safest place in the world for children to grow up.
Yeah. My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow the noble Lord Knight. Like him, I've been involved in debating issues on online safety through from the Internet Safety Green Paper through the Joint Committee on the Draft Online Safety Bill, and then through to seeing through the Online Safety Bill through to an Act, my Lords. I declare at the same time an interest as a consultant to DLA Piper on AI policy and regulation. I rise to speak in support of my noble friend Lord Mohammed of Tinsley's amendments 94B and 94C to Amendment 94A tabled by the noble Lord Nash. And in doing so, I do urge this House to strengthen his proposal by transforming it from a blanket ban into an effective harm-based approach to social media regulation, which can actually be implemented and enforced within the same timetable. Now, the government has announced, as we've heard, a 3-month consultation on children's social media use. And this is a welcome demonstration that the government recognises the importance of this issue and is willing to consider further action beyond the Online Safety Act. However, our amendments make it clear that we should not wait until summer or even beyond to act when we have a workable, legally operable solution before us today. Far from weakening Lord Nash's proposal, our amendments are designed to make raising the age to 16 deliverable in practice, not just attractive in a headline. Now, my Lords, I share the noble Lord Nash's diagnosis. We are facing a catastrophe regarding children's mental health, with young people exposed to misogyny, violence and addictive algorithms. And I welcome his leadership in bringing this critical issue before the House. And I strongly support his proposal for a default minimum age of 16. After 20 years of profiteering from our children's attention, we need a reset. The voices of young people themselves are impossible to ignore. At the same time, tens of thousands of parents have reached out to us all in just the last week, calling to raise the age. We cannot let them down. And the government has announced that ministers will visit Australia to learn from their approach. But I do urge them to learn the right lessons. Australia has taken the stance of banning social media for under 16s with a current list of 10 platforms. However, their approach demonstrates three critical flaws that Amendment 94A, as currently drafted, would replicate and that we must avoid. First of all, the definition problem. The Australian legislation has had to draw explicit lines that keep services such as WhatsApp, Google Classroom and many gaming platforms out of scope in order to make the ban effective. Lord Nash has rightly recognised these difficulties by giving the Secretary of State power to exclude platforms. But, my lords, that simply moves the arbitrariness from a list in legislation to ministerial discretion. What criteria would the Secretary of State use? Our approach instead puts those decisions on a transparent, risk-based footing with Ofcom and the Children's Commissioner rather than in one pair of hands. Secondly, my lords, the cliff edge problem. The unamended approach of 94A risks protecting children in a sterile digital environment until their 16th birthday, then suddenly flooding them with harmful content without having developed the digital literacy to cope. As the joint statement from 42 children's charities warns, children aged 16 would face a dangerous cliff edge when they start to use high-risk platforms. My lords, our amendment addresses this. Third, this risks being the dangerous dogs approach to regulation. Just as breed-specific legislation failed because it focused on the type of dog rather than dangerous behaviour, the Australian ban focuses on categories rather than risk. Because it is tied to the significant purpose of social interaction, the Australian ban currently excludes high-risk environments such as Roblox, Discord and many AI chatbots, even though children spend amounts of time there. An arbitrary list based on what platforms do will not deal with the core issue of harm. The Molly Rose Foundation has rightly warned that this simply risks migrating bad actors, groomers, violent groups from banned platforms to these permitted ones, and we end up playing whack-a-mole with children's safety. Our amendment is designed precisely to address that. My lords, our concerns are shared by the very organisations at the forefront of child safety. This weekend, 42 charities and experts, including the Molly Rose Foundation, NSPCC, Internet Watch Foundation, Childline, the Brecht Foundation and the Centre for Protecting Women Online, issued a joint statement warning that social media bans are the wrong solution. They warn that blanket bans risk creating a false sense of safety and call instead for risk-based minimum ages and design duties that reflect the different levels of risk on different platforms. When the family of Molly Russell, whose tragic death galvanised this entire debate, warns against blanket bans and calls for targeted regulation, we must listen. Those are the organisations who every day pick up the pieces when things go wrong online. And they are clear that a simple ban may feel satisfying, but it is the wrong tool and it risks a dangerous false sense of safety. Our amendments build on Lord Nash's foundation while addressing these critical flaws. They provide a ready-made answer to many of the questions the government's promised consultation will raise about minimum ages, age verification, addictive design features, and how to ensure platforms take responsibility for child safety. we retain the default minimum age of 16. Crucially, that would remain the law for every platform unless and until it proves against rigorous criteria that it is safe enough to merit a lower age rating. However, and this is the crucial improvement, platforms could be granted exemptions if and only if they can demonstrate to Ofcom and the Children's Commissioner that they do not present a risk of harm. Our amendments would create film-style age ratings for platforms. Safe educational platforms could be granted exemptions with appropriate minimum ages, and the criteria are rigorous. Platforms would have to demonstrate that they meet Ofcom's guidance on risk-based minimum ages, protect children's rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, have considered their impact on children's mental health, have investigated whether their design encourages addictive use, and have reviewed their algorithms for content recommendation and targeted advertising. So this is not a get-out clause for tech companies. This is tied directly to whether the actual design and algorithms on their platforms are safe for children. Crucially, exemptions are subject to periodic review, and if standards slip, the exemption can be revoked. First, this prevents mitigating harms. If Discord or a gaming lobby presents high risk, it would not qualify for exemption. If a platform proves it's safe, it becomes accessible, and we regulate risk to the child, not the type of technology. Secondly, it incentivises safety by design. The Australian model tells platforms build a wall to block children. This concern is shared by the Online Safety Act network, representing 23 organisations spanning child protection, suicide prevention and violence against women and girls. And they warn that current implementation focuses on, quote, ex post measures to reduce the harm that has already occurred, rather than upstream, content neutral by design interventions to seek to prevent it occurring in the first place. And they call explicitly for requiring platforms to address harms to children caused by addictive or compulsive design, precisely what our amendment mandates. My Lords, third, it is future-proof. We must prepare for a future that has already arrived, AI, chatbots and tomorrow's technologies. Our risk-based approach allows Ofcom and the Children's Commissioner to regulate emerging harms effectively, rather than playing catch-up with exemptions. We should not adopt a blunt instrument that bans Wikipedia or education and helpline services by accident, drives children into high-risk gaming sites by omission, or creates a dangerous cliff edge at 16 by design. We should not fall into the trap of regulating categories rather than harms, and we should not put the power to choose in one person's hands, namely the Secretary of State. My Lords, instead, let us build on Lord Nash's foundation by empowering Ofcom and the Children's Commissioner to implement a sophisticated, world-leading system, one that protects children based on actual risk, while allowing them to learn, communicate and develop digital resistance. So I do urge the House to support our amendments to Amendment 94A.
Great.
I rise to the Bishop.
My Lords, perhaps I'm a simple-minded, naive bishop, but it seems that we're getting into the kind of debate that we should probably have had at committee stage between different ways of approaching quite a specific issue, and I'd really rather we didn't spend all night doing that. But yet we are where we are. The very fact that these amendments are 95A, 95B, the ones we're discussing, is a symptom of the fact that these issues have really come to the fore of the public's concern in relatively recent times. And I've got to the point where I'm thinking, I don't care which amendment we pass tonight, as long as we pass something that then allows some time for things to go back to the Commons, for them to give consideration, for it to come back to here, and let's have that process. Even though it's relatively late in the stage of a bill, I think we can have a good process beyond today, rather than trying to resolve the matter once and for all on the floor of the House this evening. That's my main point. My second point is why I think we're perhaps in a better place now than we were a few months ago, and it has worried me how we haven't taken action against some of the big tech companies in the USA in recent times. We know that the US government puts this government, us, our nation, under extreme pressure. Nobody's mentioned that today. It feels a bit like the elephant in the room. But perhaps we do need to now show our courage, and particularly given all that's happening in and around Greenland, perhaps now is the time that we say we're not pusillanimous anymore. We're standing up for Britain, for what Britain needs, whatever the tech bros think is in their interests.
My lords, it is an absolute pleasure to follow the bishop, because I'm going to mirror his words in many ways. The Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop, beg your pardon. And before I start, I just want to thank our warm-up act, the Noble Lady Penn. That's a fantastic result. I hope that the Minister gives you all that you want, and I think you should be proud of yourself that you've done it in just a couple of years, because I think since I raised it, the child born when I first raised it is probably in tertiary education by now. So 2 years is a very good time frame. My lords, I actually had a quite different speech that I had written before I saw the government's consultation announcement, but that made me rather angry, because it doesn't concern itself with the gaps in provision or enforcement of the Online Safety Act, nor the emerging or future threats that we repeatedly raise. It does not seek to speed up enforcement or establish why non-compliant companies are not named in Ofcom research, nor are named while they're being investigated. It is a consultation entirely focused on 2 amendments that this House might send to the other House that their backbenchers might agree to. So, my lords, it is a consultation whose purpose is to stave off a backbench rebellion. It's not child safety, it's not governance, it's party management. And I believe the UK children deserve better than that. So we have 2 amendments before us. Neither enjoy the support of all those who care about child safety. And what a gift, as the Right Reverend Prelate said, what a gift that has been to the government, because it allows them to kick the issue down the road. The United Kingdom, once at the forefront of tech safety, commended for its AI Safety Institute, the Age-Appropriate Design Code, the Online Safety Act, the provisions for bereaved parents, all first and best in class, has squandered its advantage. Instead, we are becoming a case study for those who would like to prove that the tech sector is beyond national laws, that it is a law unto itself. And regulation has failed, not because it can't work, but because the regime envisaged by Parliament was weakened by lobbying and critically undermined in its implementation. It's not regulation failing in principle, it's political will failing in practice. My lords, there are very good reasons that all the child safety experts and organisations have urged the government not to settle for a social media ban. Their collective view is clear, a ban is blunt, partial, fails to tackle root harms, shift the burden from tech to parents and children, abandon 16 and 17-year-olds, and actually for me, possibly the biggest thing that they're saying that we must hear is that it sends a dangerous message to a demographic that already experiences widespread disaffection, that while the future is all digital and AI, they are not invited. And I agree with every single one of those points. However, the government has, over the last 15 months, ignored the howl of pain from parents and children, preferring to sup with big tech, and many have come to the view that if they can't have the digital world they were promised for their children after a decade of work on the Online Safety Bill Act, they would rather have nothing at all. And my lords, I say this reluctantly, but all of the social media companies caught by Australia's ban are already in scope of the USA. So today marks a very low day for Ofcom, because we are rehearsing between these 2 groups exactly what we rehearsed, exactly what it is that Ofcom was supposed to solve. And my lords, I will finally say in public, I have resisted this for some time, believe me. What others have been saying, including Ian Russell, for months, Ofcom are too timid, they're too close to tech, they're too secretive, they've narrowed the scope, they've tackled the Act in the most bureaucratic fashion possible, and they have held Parliament in contempt by failing to enact all parts of the Act, including the different ages, as the noble Lord Knight. I know him very well. We are friends. The noble Lord Knight said, my lords, nothing will change until Ofcom changes. What parents and children really need is an Online Safety Act to work as it was intended and to reset the incentives and culture of the regulator. That means safety by design, not box ticking, outcomes, not process, overarching duty of care, not safe harbour that allows companies to keep unsafe features with no penalty. It means mitigating all harms identified in risk assessments and speeding up enforcement. Now, the previous Secretary of State failed to take the opportunity to strengthen the bill under Section 44 on the draft codes, but the current Secretary of State has the power to act under Section 47 of the OSA on public safety grounds. We have police talking about tsunami of AI child sexual abuse. We've heard that the Royal Medical Colleges have announced a public health emergency. Similarly, the Secretary of State can send guidance about Ofcom, about its functions under Section 176, so far unused. What about safety on design, on addictive and compulsive loops, violence against women and girls, and on minimum standards in terms and conditions? And, my lords, she could accept the amendments laid to the Crime and Policing Bill that protect children from carelessly designed AI chatbots, women from sexual humiliation and pornography, answer the calls for bereaved parents for rapid and automatic access to data. They were promised action and have been badly let down. My lord, it is not my intention to rehearse all that we can do, but please let us vote in the full knowledge that everything that could be done is not being done as we speak. My lords, desperate parents and teachers are losing faith that the institutions of government can act, and I believe that is dangerous not only for child safety, but dangerous for society as a whole. Which begs the question, how am I going to vote? Yeah? My lords, when I first entered the House, a debate raged, just like this one today, between those who wanted to reform sex and relationship education in schools and those who wanted wider PHSE settlement. Both sides had compelling arguments, but because we failed to come together, neither succeeded, and children waited for another 10 years before anything happened. Yesterday, the Secretary of State cited our differences as the reason for the government consultation, but, my lords, that is false accounting. The desire for a ban is a direct result of the failure to do the better thing, to implement the Online Safety Act in its full scope. And if children were protected by the OSA, then there would be no outcry, no campaign, no need to get them offline. The government has shown it will only act under pressure, not principle. That leaves me no good option on the table, and I am not prepared to wait for another 10 years. So, my lords, I will vote first with the Lib Dems, then I will vote with Lord Nash. We must send something to the other end so they have to account for the needs of parents and children in the UK. And I really do hope that the government will have a better answer than a ban. But if we do not send them something, then they have nothing to answer. And, my lords, a consultation is the playground of the tech lobbyist, and inaction is the most powerful tool in politics. And I want to make one last final point. Law does not sit in a vacuum. The Australian Prime Minister Albanese is resolute. He has a determined position on child safety. He has no compromises with the tech industry. Australia also has an experienced and fierce e-safety commissioner who is responsible to individual complainants. Her powers are robust and she can issue injunctions. Neither a ban nor the OSA will work unless we equip the regime with a route for individual complaints, vastly speeded up business disruption measures, and put in robust leadership. Ministers are suggesting that the consultation is about practical decisions, about getting more information. I, like the noble lords, green paper, white paper, pre-ledge, ledge, consultation on illegal, consultation on kids code. I mean, we have been consulted. I have listed what we could do today, and the government is not doing it. What Australia did was a political decision. They made a choice, and they are sticking to it. And we could make a choice to make the OSA what it was supposed to be, and that is what I would like to see. But, my lords, I think everybody in this House should suck it up and vote, because we have to make clear that this is not what we were promised, and this is not good enough.
My lords, Baroness Kidron, she is absolutely right. We have a choice today about whether we're going to send an amendment to the Commons to put pressure on the government to act, or whether we're going to flunk this opportunity. And I absolutely support her conclusion that this is a moment when the House of Lords does need to act. My Lords, I'd like to start by paying tribute to my noble friend the Baroness Penn for her Amendment 91, which is thoughtful, patiently put, and an important amendment. I hope very much indeed that the government will pay attention to her notes on timetable, and if necessary, I hope very much indeed the Baroness Penn will press this point so she gets what she needs. But, my Lords, I really want to address my comments to Amendment 94A, the Lord Nash amendment, and pay tribute to the Baroness Cass, Baroness Berger and Baroness Benjamin, all of whom have made an enormous impact on this. Guardrails for our children are where we have landed. I say this with some regret, but it is important that we recognise this point. The noble Baroness Cass mentioned a meeting with the Royal Colleges, and I say this as a former health minister who's had many dealings with the herd of cats that are the Royal Colleges. My Lords, if they unify and say that there is a public health emergency, we should pay attention to that moment. We should not be brushed off by attempts to knock this into the long grass by public consultations, and we should listen to our clinicians. Rebecca Falomge and the clinicians against smartphones have done conclusive research on the harms done by screen time, by predators, by fraudsters, by the filth on the internet, and by the sheer quantity of screen time that our children are subjected to. And it is an utterly persuasive argument, and further research is not needed. In fact, a consultation is exactly the tobacco industry playbook applied to smartphones for adolescents. Delay, consult, lobby, weaken. We know this playbook very, very well. We don't need a get-out-of-jail clause for the tech companies. We need implementation. And, my Lords, this is our opportunity for doing it. My Lords, like many others in this chamber, I worked really hard on the Online Safety Act to make it a success. And it is a landmark piece of legislation. Bits of it I am extremely proud. But, my Lords, it assumed that we could work with the platforms to moderate their algorithms, to remove the filth, to prevent the predators, to limit the screen time. It assumed that we were working in some kind of collaborative partnership with Facebook, Google, TikTok, Meta, Snapchat, Twitter, and all the other social media companies into protecting children and working towards some kind of better world. My Lords, that was a catastrophic misjudgment about the nature of these companies and the nature of their leadership. And the outcomes for our children, which have gone significantly backwards in the last 2 years is a testimony to that point, and that damage done to our children is accelerating with the tsunami of AI that is heading their way. The platforms have not reformed. They haven't taken the bait. Instead, they've taken the mick. They're introducing artificial intelligence at a rate and totally inappropriate chatbots to our children. The risk assessments that are an absolutely essential building block of the Ofcom regime and the Online Safety Act are an absolute insult to the intelligence of the regulators and of parents. My lords, how on earth did a risk assessment ever assess Grok's new AI tools as being safe for children? My lords, it's a complete joke. Lord Knight, Lord Clement-Jones say that these platforms can be moderated, that they can be brought to heel, that they will abide with the regulator's will. But my lords, we've got to remember that they won't change because around 25% of their clicks, of the page views, come from the children that they're targeting, and they are far too reliant on mis-selling those children's eyeballs as adult eyeballs to advertisers. So you can't regulate far-off tech titans who are reliant on that income. You can only create perimeters for which they can hunt their profits, and that's exactly what this amendment does. Now, my lords, I recognise that there are sensible, respected voices who take a completely different view. Noble lords have rightly paid tribute to the Molly Rose Foundation. Ian Russell and the NSPCC and other charities have, I know, argued that instead of guardrails, we should strengthen the Online Safety Act. They say that we should mandate well-being by design requirements, and Ian Russell has said, and I quote, we should require platforms to prioritise child well-being in algorithmic design, and that age verification creates, and I quote, a false sense of security. My lords, I just don't think that's right. This argument rests on a false premise that we can somehow design our way out of the problem whilst keeping children on platforms whose entire business model depends on their exploitation. That cannot happen. You cannot algorithmically mitigate something that is not a design problem, but a business model problem. The algorithm isn't broken. The algorithm is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is to maximise engagement, to keep eyes on the screen, to amplify provocative content, because provocative content keeps people clicking, including our children. This is not a market failure. This is a market working as designed by the companies that have monetised our children's childhood as a commodity. My lords, there are noble peers, such as the noble Lord Clement-Jones, who are flying a kite on the possibility of some kind of film-style certification system. And my lords, I also share that dream. What a wonderful world it would be to live in that world. And I did, for many years, live in that world. Previous to being here, I was the strategy director of Capital Radio in much-loved local radio, which in the 1990s was a warm and loving place to work and operate. And the government had, for every single local radio station, a licence which dictated exactly who they could broadcast to and what content they had on their radio station. And if you breached that licence, they pulled it and gave it to someone else. And it meant that local radio was extremely compliant to the licence details. And our broadcasting was a warm and lovely thing that was safe for children. But my lords, it is completely unrealistic that we're going to appoint something like a modern radio authority that's going to issue licenses for every single website in the world that's going to in some way oversee what our children access on those websites. How many bureaucrats would be needed to look at all those licenses? How many armies of enforcement agents would be needed to issue the fines? How could we possibly read all that content? My lord, our children's safety is far too important to be distracted by this. My lords, the noble Baroness Kidron is absolutely right. This consultation suggestion by the government makes me very, very angry. It isn't about evidence gathering. It's a mechanism for industry delay. It gives Meta, TikTok, Google and Snapchat 6 to 9 months to lobby, to propose alternatives, to suggest that amendment needs refinement, to fund research suggesting age verification may or may not work, even though we know it does work, to commission the same experts who said that the Online Safety Act would solve this problem. My Lord, the tobacco industry, which I know all about as a public health fanatic, played exactly the same game for 60 years. We banned smoking for children in 1908, and today 13% of the country still smoke. That is what we're looking at if we do not take the opportunity today to protect our children. We need to acknowledge the problem. We need to create clear guardrails that protect our children. And for that reason, I would urge noble lords to send a clear message to the government by sending this amendment, the Nash amendment, to the Commons with a clear vote this evening.
My Lords, I rise to support many of the amendments in this group, but I also want to express my concerns about Amendment 94A in the name of the noble Lord, Lord Nash. I've listened carefully to his arguments and those of other noble lords who support this amendment, and I too am appalled by the many stories that we've heard tonight. I too want to stop children being exposed to harms online. I hope my record in the debates on the Online Safety Act and other digital legislation show my support for measures to increase safety for children in the digital space. I, like all noble lords, recognise that there are many harms online. However, I don't think that an outright ban on social media for under 16s will be effective in protecting children. I hesitate to disagree with my noble friend, Baroness Kidron, who I normally always agree with, but I think we should be putting all the pressure we possibly can directly on Ofcom in order to make sure that we realise the hopes and dreams of the Online Safety Act. Early this morning, I had an interesting conversation with Jason Trethorn, who runs Australia's national youth mental health charity, Headspace, which was accessed last year by 170,000 young people aged between 12 and 25. In 170 locations across the country. His organisation is on the sharp end of the social media ban in Australia. His main message was, we all want to stop online harms to children, but he called on the government and on legislators to listen to children as well as parents. The noble Lord, Lord Nash, has quite rightly highlighted the harms that exist for young people on social media. However, noble lords also need to be aware of the crucial role that social media plays for young people in both communicating with each other, for getting information about the world, and very importantly, for getting help and advice from like-minded people. Jason said that we all need to understand that, that young people see the online world as their world. It is a central part of their existence, and no amount of bans will remove them from online space. Headspace told me that the ban in Australia, which started on December the 10th, 2025, was a massive shock for many young people in the country. They have been warned of its arrival for months, but still weren't prepared for the severing of their contacts on social media. Most did not have the phone numbers to continue communicating with their contacts and suddenly found themselves isolated from their peer groups. Many noble lords will dismiss these severances as youthful folly, but the charity told me of 3,000 young people who have been seen during the ban, since the ban was introduced. 10% came because they included social media bans amongst the reasons for their mental health deteriorating. One young person on an isolated farm in rural Australia had used the LGBT group on social media to find like-minded young people. He lived in a household which he regarded as homophobic and was geographically far away from many of his online contacts. Suddenly, he found his support network taken away from him. The schools in Australia are on their summer break until the end of this month, so the full extent of the disruption in the lives of young people is not known. The young LGBT person will not be able to renew his social media contacts, but my lords, rest assured he will find advice somewhere else on the internet. Young people who are banned from social media will find other ways online to assuage their appetites for communicating, information and problem solving. In Australia, Headspace is already seeing this happening. Young people who can no longer use the 10 major sites, which include Snapchat, X, YouTube, Instagram, Kik, are now migrating to AI sites. Noble lords already had debates over concerns about AI as a form of gathering information. Many will be aware that what the West Coast techies called hallucination, the rest of us called lies, appearing in AI research. And young people are using AI to resolve their problems. On November the 27th last year, this House had a debate about banning AI companions, which many young people use for advice. These can be dangerous. My noble friend Baroness Kidron told of how this led to one young man committing suicide on the advice of an AI companion. Surely, noble lords don't want to encourage young people to use these AI replacements for social media. The tech companies will feed that appetite. I know that there's a flexibility for which apps are going to be used, which is built into this Amendment 94A. However, they find in Australia that new platforms are opening all the time. The Australian government's original act banned 10 social media platforms, but already it's had to come up with another list of platforms to ban. This is a game of Guacamole, just as the noble Lord Clement-Jones said. It will not be solved by a ban on social media platforms. The media will always outpace the legislation. There are so many harms online, on social media and other platforms. We all agree on that. I've spoken to the charities that have been mentioned many times by noble lords, the Molly Russell Foundation, Internet Matters, NSPCC and Online Safety Act Network, all of whom, as noble lords have already mentioned, have championed the development of online safety for children, and all of whom want a blanket ban on all are against a blanket ban on social media for under 16s in this country. They suggest that instead of banning social media, the Online Safety Act should be amended. I know that my noble friend Baroness Kidron has said that it isn't possible to do it. We've tried, and
I'm sorry, but you are misreading what I said.
Okay.
You are misreading. I was saying exactly that.
I apologise. That should need to be amended so that safety by design for all users, and particularly young users. There is a need to strengthen Ofcom's response to tech platforms who breach their risk assessments. It needs to put onus on the platforms to mitigate the risks, instead of defining the mitigation measures, and only when there is evidence that these measures actually work, take action. This needs to be combined with the definition of safety by design. I partially support Amendment 108 in the name of the noble Lord Storey. Children's safety charities have long been calling for age-appropriate content requirements to be introduced for content on social media and across the internet. However, I think that age-appropriate design should be introduced not just for 18-year-olds, but also for 16-year-olds and even for 13-year-olds. I completely support Amendment 109. I am glad that the government is having a consultation on this. I hope sincerely that my noble friends and noble lords are wrong, that this isn't an attempt to kick this down the road. Addiction is a real problem. This is about the engagement and economy, and it does need to be dealt with. I support the call for Ofcom to revisit its interpretation of the Online Safety Act so that it includes addictive design as one of the harms it needs platforms to mitigate against. I understand the powerful instinct by noble lords and many parents to ban social media for under 16s, but I ask them to consider that young people are not going to be torn away from life online. It will not be possible to force them to leave the digital world, however much a majority of adults want that to happen.
Support of Lord Nash's amendment, and I thank all other signatories as well for this. I'm quite nervous about making this speech today because I'm praying that my daughter doesn't read Hansard. Look, I speak as a member of this House, of course, but also as a mother. And I have a direct and vested interest in this amendment, and I make no apology for that. But I also feel I have to speak for the army of parents who, like me, have watched, frankly, in disbelief as our children's childhoods have been steadily hollowed out. In varying degrees, by the way, obviously lots of us are doing everything we can to sort of, keep our children safe. I am the devil incarnate at home because I have not allowed my daughter on Snap, but we have gone into a sort of plea bargaining state, frankly, if I could put it that way, where I've not allowed Snap, but I have allowed Pinterest. Now, I thought Pinterest was perfectly harmless.
I thought that was a nice place where I sort of picked wallpapers and, you know, had a jolly nice time sort of going through it. What could possibly be the problem? I was delighted. I said, yes, of course you can have Pinterest. Like Lord Knight said, this is quite an artistic way to operate. But of course, what's going on is, in fact, Pinterest is now just pushing my daughter a whole load of consumer, enormous amount of advertising. So she's popped in, you know, that she wants a T-shirt of some make or whatever, and of course now, bang, 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 the notifications are coming in non-stop. There is a big reason now that we have teenage girls, not even teenage girls, 11-year-old girls, 10-year-old girls, slathering their faces with hydrochloric acid and anti-aging creams, products they should not ever even know about, let alone be buying, not least because they're blooming expensive. It is ridiculous. And I would say that, you know, adolescence is a period of profound emotional and neurological change. Hormones, friendships, identity, insecurity playing out in a young, developing brains, and to then introduce the relentless comparison, exposure, validation, and amplification of what social media does is to add a weapon to those brains who are simply too young to cope. And crucially, they just shouldn't be expected to cope. And I completely accept that the arguments against a full ban, you know, I hardly ever disagree with Baroness Kidron, and I met with Molly Russell's father 2 days ago, and I have huge respect, and huge respect for the other side of the argument that perhaps it is just too black and white. But I'm afraid these companies, they absolutely thrive in the complication, the sophistication, the difficulty. So as a parent, there I am already trying to get the parental locks on, trying to work out the mind-boggling, you know, how do I turn the push notifications off? How do I stop the device going into the bedroom with, you know, with degrees of success? And I think 5 years ago, a partial ban or platform-led safeguards might have been defensible had we been dealing with companies worthy of trust. That trust has now completely disintegrated. You know, the work I've done in the pornography review, a boy, well, we know that boys age 11, children 11, probably under, but from 11 onwards have seen pornography. A boy, before his first kiss, age 13, will have seen rape porn, he will have seen strangulation porn, he will have seen incest porn. Where did he see that porn? Mainly on X, but 8 out of 10 sites, it's social media sites. It's not pornography sites. It is an outrage. And that was something they knew about. That was something they were actually actively pushing. It wasn't that the kids were necessarily looking for it. They were actually pushing those algorithms onto them. So how can we possibly trust having a kind of dialogue with these firms when we know that that is their business model, as Lord Bethell made very clear? At the other end of the scale, research shows that 70% of offenders attempt to contact children. They do so online. I mean, my lord, this is a business model that is sort of borderline criminal, but it is certainly very toxic, and it is so sophisticated. How the amendments that allow this sort of, you know, we're going to have a conversation with Ofcom, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, I just think they are going to... They have already made off with like bandits with our children's innocence, and I just think they will carry on doing so, to be perfectly honest, if we take that approach. So I think an overall ban is essential. Then afterwards we look at which apps and which sites are going to be suitable. I do also want to say that children... my point about meeting Molly Russell's father this week, we had one of the most thoughtful, constructive meetings I've had in a long time. And whatever the outcome of today, we have agreed to work together going forward. His campaigning has been principled and tireless and rooted in love for his daughter. However, I believe respectfully that some of the arguments that have been put forward against a ban don't withstand scrutiny. Children, I don't believe, do not need a social media platforms to find protection, belonging or community. Childhood social networks existed a long time before algorithmic-driven platforms were optimised for engagement and profit. And I do accept my great friend Colville's comments about children who are vulnerable where they lose their networks. But I'm afraid in difficult issues like this, with difficult laws, you have to govern for the majority while being very mindful that some minorities will suffer. But what is causing more harm, and I'm afraid wholesale, I believe that social media operating in the way that they are for under 16s is causing huge, huge harm. Finally, I would like to say that, like with Baroness Kidron, I do not accept that announcing yet another consultation is a serious response to a problem of this scale. A review at this stage, as she said, is just cynical, managing of politics, and I really hope that my esteemed and many of my great friends in the other place will see it for what it is. And we've got to send this back to the Commons. Regardless of whether we agree on full bans, partial bans, we have a job to do. And we must not lose this shot at changing and helping our children, protecting our children in this way. We are not short of evidence, we are short of action.
Yeah. My lords, once upon a time, in a previous moral panic about children's safety, parents reacted to media and politicians catastrophising by stopping their offspring playing outside unsupervised. The unintended consequences were the creation of what became known as cotton wool kids, prone to risk aversion, anxiety, a lack of resilience, and social isolation. Ironically, of course, to compensate, many of those children were forced to cultivate their activities online. Their social interactions became virtual. And here we are. I worry that we risk a similar unintended consequences now if we rush to pass this social media ban for under 16, so I will be opposing Amendment 94A. I know it's become normalised that whatever the social, cultural, moral panics we encounter, we believe we can legislate to make them go away. But I fear this sort of lawmaking can lead to evading tackling difficult problems, an attempted quick-fix solution that can too often create a whole new raft of difficulties down the line. I also noticed that the noble Lord Nash blamed social media for eating disorders, radicalisation, terrorism, mental health epidemic, ADHD, poor behaviour in the classroom, misogyny, violence against women and girls, and on and on. I mean, at this rate, all that Parliament would have to do is to just ban the internet for everyone and all problems would be solved. In fact, I think there's a danger of looking for easy answers and scapegoating social media for all society's ills. I worry about attempts as well to push this through too quickly or to fast-track it. It's quite interesting that the 3-week fast-track consultation put forward in the place has been discussed as though it's holding things back, even though, in fact, and the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, who calls it more dither and delay. Yet this proposal is new. It's only just arrived here at report stage, an amendment that will fundamentally change every citizen's relationship with social media, not just children's. And I worry about attempts at steamrolling it through with an assumption that everyone agrees, that it's so obvious and inevitable that there's just no point opposing. I am grateful to the Liberal Democrats and the noble Lord Mohammed of Tinsley for an attempt at proportionality, even though I don't think it goes far enough. But we're hectored that this is what parents want. There hasn't been a referendum of parents, there are polls, and of course many parents are pulling their hair out and will be tempted by it. It's so much easier to say you can't because it's against the law than it is to assert adult authorities. Teenagers and children's pester power can be the bane of all our lives. If only the law could be extended to ban other things. No, you can't wear that hoodie. No, you can't spend hours gaming. It's against the law. No, you can't go on that sleepover. No, you can't gorge on junk food or go to that party. It's illegal. But in truth, this approach encourages parents to outsource their authority and shifts responsibility from parents to the state. All families ultimately are being told that they are incapable of managing their own children's habits, and that is a dangerous precedent. It can disarm parents in the name of empowerment. Is there really a consensus of parents on this? Because many of my friends are split down the middle. So I don't think we can claim the evidence is in. What about the incontrovertible evidence that backs a ban from science? Actually, the jury is out. It's much more contested than has been implied in relation to the causal relationship between social media and mental well-being in teens and young people. Recent extensive research by academics at Manchester University found no evidence that social media has increased teenagers' symptoms of anxiety or depression. Under the chair of the suicide prevention workforce, Professor Louis Appleby, points out that the evidence is at best circumstantial, noting that self-harming in the young began well before social media took hold in that age group, and that reflects my own work in relation to mental ill health and young people that I do not think can totally be blamed on social media. An Oxford University study of nearly 12,000 children showed no correlation between screen time, including social media, and mental health. Instead, the way in which children engage with social media is what determines its impact. And shock horror, in many instances, the evidence shows the positive impact of social media use. And the noble Lord Bethell, might say, as he did, that no more research is needed. I think that's anti-scientific and complacent, and I just don't think it's true. Let's be clear about what this amendment, as drafted, will do in relation to user services. And the noble Lord Knight pointed out the dangers to, for example, WhatsApp, websites such as Wikipedia and so on. I think that needs clarifying at the very least. But despite histrionic headlines, social media itself directly can be used for self-educational ends. There's a new generation of autodidacts who are teaching themselves coding, video producing, editing, even musical instruments, languages, chess. And I know that sounds rose-tinted and a bit glib, but mainly it can and often is a social tool for connections, finding your tribe, new friends, a place in which you can cultivate solidarity and autonomy as a young person, a counter to the social trends towards fragmentation. And what about allowing the young to explore diverse political perspectives? On the eve of 16-year-olds being given the vote, surely it's important, essential, we don't narrowly restrict soon-to-vote teens to state-sanctioned media channels. We want them to broaden their horizons, to explore and develop a democratic curiosity about the world, and they're going to do that online. Talking to school pupils, when I do often, I recommend they find out about their peers around the world. I think it's part of them learning about international relations. What civic lessons might British children learn by looking at those brave protesters in Iran, whose commitment to freedom has given them the courage to take on a theocratic Islamic regime, and whose stories we know because they use social media to organise, connect with each other and the rest of the world? That was, of course, before the Ayatollah shut down the internet. Oh, the irony. Also, in terms of safety and whether this ban will throw children off a cliff edge, I do think it risks not equipping youth with the skills to safely and responsibly navigate the online world, of knowing how to identify problems, spot dodgy red flags and apply strategies to deal with them. And of course, as the noble Lord Mohammed of Tinsley pointed out, in all likelihood, many pre-16-year-olds will find ways of migrating onto even riskier, unregulated platforms or the dark web without guardrails and zero moderation. Our teenagers, our children are clever, dare I say, devious. They'll find a way. They'll use VPNs, but it's okay because the noble lords are going to ban those too. But there is already a roaring trade in fake IDs amongst pre-teens, I hear. Finally, how will over 16-year-old adults be affected by this ban? Whereas the Online Safety Act age-gated only certain types of harmful content, by 94A would do so age-gate entire platforms, even when the content is child-friendly or harmless. According to Big Brother Watch, a 70-year-old accessing the neighbourhood news, a 50-year-old looking up the history of golf on Wikipedia, a 30-year-old small business owner responding to customers on Instagram, a 70-year-old wanting to message parents on the way home from school would all require age verification measures. This is a threat, potentially at least, to adult civil liberties and the right to privacy, and effectively means we'll have to digitally verify to participate in the public square. I don't necessarily think that young people are going to gain from this, despite the hyperbole.
We are at the court stage, and I do think that some of the contributions are in danger of erring on the wrong side of self-regulation. I really do think we should stick to the point, and I will be very brief, and I will simply try and explain for the benefit of the government frontbench, because in various bills going through in the last month or so, this subject has raised itself in various forms, and I sometimes notice the frontbench being slightly amazed at what is coming at them from all sides and can't necessarily understand why. And that is to a large extent because the front bench was not in your Lordship's house at the time that we went through the lengthy discussions about the Online Safety Act. And what you are hearing today is a collective sort of howl of rage and frustration across the House at what we thought we were being very clear was meant to happen, has not happened. So I will just give one or two facts which I think back up my noble friend Baroness Kidron's view that whatever we do, we have to gather together, and the noble prelate made a very good point, and collectively send a message back to the other place that the situation we are in is simply not good enough. Now, my lords, today, within the last 10 hours, in California, there is a court case going on against Snap, against Meta, and against TikTok, by a group of parents who are accusing these organizations of creating products which are addictive. And it just so happens that in the last 24 hours, Snap, the parent company of Snapchat, has settled with the complainants. And the reason they have settled, I suspect, is because very shortly, if they had not settled, the chief executive of Snapchat, somebody called Evan Spiegel, would actually have to have appeared in person in the court to answer the case against his company. And he chose not to. Mr. Zuckerberg apparently is also in the queue to perhaps give evidence at this trial, and it will be interesting to see if his company takes the same route. My Lords, yesterday I was part of a session with Learn with the Lords in the Education Centre with many other colleagues, and I took the opportunity to talk to the young people, most of whom were 14 and 15, what they thought about the idea of a social media ban, which all of them were aware of, probably through social media. Almost without exception, when I asked the children what they thought about it, they said they were against it, and they gave the sort of reasons you would expect, that's where we get our news from, etc. The teachers were completely and utterly in favour of a ban. So you can take from that what you will, but I suspect the fact that those teachers are seeing day in, day out in the schoolroom the effects on the pupils that they are trying to help, they're trying to develop, they're trying to manage, they're trying to mitigate, in some cases, some difficult behaviours. They are completely united that this is unsustainable. The noble lady Baroness Kidron mentioned in Australia they have a different version, they have a different regulator, they have an e-safety commissioner. And my lords, the best way of comparing the e-safety commissioner in Australia to what we have in Ofcom is it's a bit like comparing Crocodile Dundee with Dixon of Dock Green. My lords, it is that stark, the difference between them. I met in the Piers lobby last week one of the bereaved parents whose child has died as a result of exposure to social media. And I told that bereaved parent that a group of us were going to meet with the chief executive of Ofcom within the next couple of weeks. So he looked at me straight in the eyes and he said, "Simon, would you give the chief executive a message from me?" So I said, "Yes, of course." And he said, "You will excuse my Anglo-Saxon, would you kick her up the arse?" So, my lords, what you are also hearing from the noble Baroness Lady Kidron, who is occasionally, I have heard, accused of being somewhat angry and irate when we got onto these subjects. My lords, that is entirely understandable. She founded Five Rights in 2013. We are now 13 years later. She is
repeating some of the same arguments, the same warnings, the same evidence, which she has been doing again and again and again. I would also remind your lordships that for many of those years, the noble Baroness was the person who all of the bereaved parents would go to have somebody who understood what they were going through, who would work to coalesce and bring the bereaved parents together, so they actually had a community because they had nowhere else to go to. So she has lived directly with the shame, the fear, the anger, the sorrow that these bereaved parents have had, and she has helped them deal with that, and in so doing has worked with them, and everybody has thought and hoped that delivering the Online Safety Act would provide, at least in part, an answer. The fact that those bereaved parents are as disappointed as they are with where we are is a cry of shame which Parliament has to listen to. So I would entirely agree with the noble Baroness Kidron. I don't mind which way you vote. That's what I actually tell the kids. Whatever you do, vote. Please vote. Whichever way you vote, let's send a message back and let's get this dealt with.
My Lords, I agree with my noble friend Baroness Kidron and the Right Reverend Prelate. We have a choice to make today, and I hope we're going to make the right choice. My Lords, I rise to support Baroness Penn's amendment, which is a really important amendment. Early years matters. It matters so much that we must do everything we can to protect those early years. But my Lords, I rise also to support the amendments in the name of the noble Lord Nash, which I have put my name to. And I wish to speak on Amendment 94A in support of this really important amendment, as I strongly believe children under the age of 16 should not be able to access social media and have social media accounts. My Lords, I feel this is a necessary measure until the online platforms accept their responsibility and implement stringent safety controls and perform their duties to our children. We have given them the opportunities to do so. Now is the time for us to act decisively, because each minute we wait, more damage is done to our children's well-being. My Lords, it's great that the government has moved on this issue, but I believe in the wrong direction. There is no need for a consultation, which causes even further delay. We have all the evidence we need. We have to stop this catastrophe now, because the world is watching us. And I believe many countries will follow suit, because this is a global crisis. My Lords, there are those who believe this amendment is a blunt instrument and will prevent children accessing the outside world. I don't agree. Consider the options. What would you rather have? A choice between children becoming addicted, showing signs of anxiety, even taking their own lives, and being exposed to the terrible age-inappropriate dangers allowed by social media providers who don't have our children's interests at heart, or protecting them until those social media providers get their acts together. I know which one I would choose. My Lords, this amendment sends a clear message to those who want to harm our children and fail to protect them. They have failed their duty to do so. Now is the time for us to act, as I've said. My Lords, it's important to make it clear that children don't need a social media account to access the internet. And I'm not proposing to ban children from the internet, which is a great source of information for their educational studies on platforms like Wikipedia or BBC Bitesize. This amendment is a preventative one. It'll prevent them from having social media accounts where they can be contacted, reveal personal and private details which expose them to potential abuse, harm, or cohesive behaviour. My Lords, the word banned is an emotive word. This amendment is a preventative measure.
In the same way, children cannot buy alcohol or buy a lottery ticket. You won't allow your children to freely play on the motorway, so why do we allow them to easily open social media accounts which can cause harm, trauma, and in some cases, endanger their lives? My lords, for the last 20 years or more, I have been speaking out and begging children to resist temptation and to be aware of what the online world was seducing them into. I have begged them to switch off and say no to these temptations, which are leading them down to a path of potential harm. Unfortunately, my message and warnings didn't spread far enough, and we're now facing a crisis, an epidemic of children suffering from mental health issues, depression, isolation, bullying, blackmail, and intimidation. My lords, the frightening list goes on and on and on because of their exposure to the dark side of social media. My lords, what have we done to our children? Many of them have had their innocent childhoods snatched away from them, sliding down into a cesspit of uncontrolled harm, danger, and disturbing behavior. My lords, the scary reality of the depression and mental health issues children are experiencing is frightening. In 2024, according to the Office of Health Improvement Disparities, there has been a 22.7% increase in suicide rates of ages between 10 and 24, between 2012 and 2022. It's been well documented that adolescents are showing rising addiction to social media and face a doubled risk of suicidal behaviour. My lords, there's been a 5-fold increase amongst 11 to 16-year-olds of eating disorder, according to the NHS Digital Mental Health of Children and Young People in England. The Nutfield Foundation predicts GCSE's results will worsen steadily over the years to come, when fewer than 40% of pupils will achieve good grades in maths and English. My lords, the decline of children being exposed to books and reading skills are now becoming evident, and many organisations, such as the Book Trust, are striving to encourage reading and to persuade children to pick up books and become lovers of the written word. My lords, another worrying concern for us all, as highlighted last year by the Children's Commissioner, is that 59% of children first saw pornography by accident, and 27% has seen pornography by the age of 11. One mother told me her 4-year-old was abused by a 10-year-old who said to her, "I'm going to rape you and you're going to like it." Where did he get that kind of language from? My lords, in one Demos focus group, every single girl had received unsolicited sexual images. There's also evidence children are now using mainstream social media to host live sexual content for payment. My lords, how did we get to this? Why have we allowed this to happen? My lords, the proportion of children reported as perpetrators of sexual offences is rising, driven significantly by early exposure to pornography. This is something I have long lobbied to prevent. And thank goodness we now have Ofcom implementing protection due to the Online Safety Act. My lords, social media can be addictive and consume time and energy in a negative way, especially for young people. Research from the World Health Organization has found that 11% of adolescents globally show signs of problematic social media use, addiction-like symptoms, including inability to control usage, withdrawal symptoms when offline, neglect of other activities, and showing signs of anxiety. My lords, in England, 20% of 11-year-old girls and 23% of 13-year-old girls have problematic usage. This is 3 to 5 times higher than adult alcohol dependency and 3.5 times higher than adult drug dependency. My lords, let us release our children from this dependency and anxiety. Let us set them free from all of this. We must do this. My lords, children need a world of positive role models, giving them a holistic understanding of the world around them, presented in a verified way, not an online environment that distorts their thinking, behaviour and perception of the world, with misinformation, conspiracy theories and fake news, a world filled with influencers, a world making them feel inadequate. My daughter is a teacher and is having to deal with the outcome of all of this on a daily basis, like so many other teachers across the country. My lords, what is social media doing to our children today and exposing them to? What type of future is ahead of them? If we do nothing now to protect our children and grandchildren, we should be ashamed of ourselves, as the damage to young minds and heartaches of families will only increase. There is an argument for more parental control, but parents can only look over their shoulder. They can't look over their shoulder 24/7. They need our help. So I urge the government to back this amendment, help protect our children, because there's a strong case from teachers, health practitioners, parents and law enforcement that children under the age of 16 should not be able to access social media accounts. We have a huge responsibility to safeguard our precious children and their well-being. This amendment is vital. It sends a clear message to those who would harm our children and allow them to be scarred for life. Because as I always say, and I'll say it again, childhood lasts a lifetime. That's why I wholeheartedly support Amendment 94A, and I urge other members to do the same.
My lords.
My lords, my lords, my lords, my lords, my lords. My lords, I rise to speak to Amendment 94A, which I have added my name to, along with Baroness Benjamin, Baroness Cass and Lord Nash. In the interest of time, I won't talk about the other amendments, but commend Noble Baroness for her introduction of this group of amendments. My lords, there are a handful of issues that consume me on a daily basis, and it's the negative impact of social media on millions of children and young people in this country that is one of them. And it's the fact that despite the important introduction of the Online Safety Act to control illegal material and prevent children from accessing harmful and inappropriate content, as Baroness Kidron expertly articulated, there isn't a week, I don't think, that goes by in this place where we don't hear how Ofcom is struggling to enact and enforce this important legislation. And that law doesn't do anything to protect the next generation from social media with its highly addictive algorithms, its constant notifications, its ability for unsolicited contact by people unknown to children, and its barrage of content which young people aren't even seeking or searching for, that whilst it might not fall under the definitions of illegal or harmful, it is still misogynistic, it's divisive, it's shaming, it diminishes our children's self-worth, it's racist, it's dangerous, it's violent, it's disproportionately misinformation and disinformation. And my lords, we are going backwards. Because if we do nothing, the situation is only going to get worse as the tech companies continue to fight for our children and young people's attention and develop their social media products to get as many eyeballs on their platforms as they can in the pursuit of profit. I'm deeply concerned as one of the handful of parents in this place with primary-aged children and the constant stream of case studies I hear from other parents about the effect social media is having on their children who have had to move school due to bullying on social media, who have had the police turn up on their doorstep due to their children being groomed or exploited on social media platforms, or whose child is in inpatient mental health care for the eating disorders they are suffering from that has been amplified due to social media use. I'm deeply concerned, having listened closely to our teachers, who, as we've heard on a daily basis, are having to grapple in the classroom with the consequences of the content our children and young people are being bombarded with on social media and the impact that this is having on their attainment. And it's no surprise, given Ofcom tells us that the average time our children are spending on these platforms is 21 hours a week. I'm deeply concerned about the adverse impact of social media on mental health, reflecting on the wealth of stories I've heard over many years from clinicians, including from our accident and emergency departments. There are too many tragic cases where children and young people are experiencing trauma or have died by suicide or injury following what they've seen or been subjected to on social media. The list of harms is so long it would take more time than I'm allowed to set them all out with real-life case studies. But this is about more than the stories that have been shared. Now, there may not have been a referendum, but staggeringly, nearly 250,000 parents, grandparents and carers in the past 6 days alone have taken time out of their busy days to write to every MP in the country calling for a ban via the Smartphone Free Childhood campaign. There are 75% of the British public that want this, according to polling from More in Common that we had just before Christmas. And the polling out today, which shows us a majority of 13 to 24-year-olds say that government should remove access to social media for those under 16. Or significantly, 78% of Gen Z would delay giving their own child access to social media for as long as possible, having experienced social media themselves as a child. But of course, it is also about the evidence. And last year, I participated in the Mental Health Advisory Group for the Youth Futures Foundation, which published first of its kind findings from research carried out by the University of Manchester and UCL. The research explored the population-level explosion in youth mental health problems that we are all well aware of. And the most robust evidence indicates that following the steep increase in young people's social media and connected smartphone use, that there has been a negative impact on our young people's mental health, particularly symptoms of low mood and anxiety. And the consistency of inference across research designs provides us with some confidence that a causal relationship exists. Surveys tell us about teachers' daily experiences in the classroom, and members of the NASUWT Teaching Union have identified social media specifically as the primary factor in the deterioration of behaviour in our schools, including in primary schools, as well as the primary factor in the decline in empathy, respect, and the normalisation of abusive conduct, along with a reduction in attention span. Similarly, the National Education Union also tells us that this is having a damaging impact on schools, is having an additional responsibility, is adding to the workloads and stress of our teachers, diverting time away from teaching and learning. We already have the evidence we need that social media is causing irrefutable damage. Now, I know that there are some colleagues that question increasing the age of access to social media to 16. And I have looked very closely at the work of Labour colleagues in Australia who brought forward a world first and introduced a ban. Australia took 12 months to implement the legislation, which has now been in place for a month. And reflecting on the Australian E-Safety Commissioner's words after that first month, Australia are heartened and pleased that in the first week of a ban, 4.7 million social media accounts were deactivated in Australia. It is clear that the e-safety regulators' guidance and engagement with platforms is already delivering significant outcomes. And there isn't evidence from Australia that young people currently are migrating to the dark web or other unregulated spaces, but the law in Australia enables their regulator to track the migratory patterns of young people to see where they go next, to identify any unintended consequences and respond, which this amendment enables. This includes responding to any new technology that may crop up. They have done work in Australia with their youth mental health organisations to ensure that young people can access mental health referrals and support via alternative channels to social media, including hotlines. And in response to the Noble Lord Clement-Jones, Australia have looked at how to provide young people to help them engage with friends in other ways. All the while, they will be able to build digital literacy and resilience for more years before they are 16 and have access to social media. And as the Communication Minister has said in Australia, they are giving children 3 more years to build their community and identity offline. My Lords, this is just one measure that will make a difference. The Australians have been clear that this is a first step, certainly not a cure-all. And while there may be some workarounds that emerge, just because some young people access alcohol or tobacco underage, that doesn't mean we don't ban alcohol or tobacco. It's not a reason to rule out a ban. It's about setting a cultural standard, and it's about applying a precautionary principle that we have already applied in this country to so many other harms affecting our children. There are so many people across this country that want a ban. parents, as I've identified, the security services and the police as set out by Lord Nash, our teachers together with their unions, our medical professionals as set out by Baroness Cass, our doctors who tell us this is a public health emergency, adults who are recently adolescents, bereaved parents, including Esther Guy, and many of whom I know are here today with us and have written to us so powerfully. And significantly, the majority of children and young people today say that they want a ban. It's too important not to adopt a minimum age when so many are calling for it. And I welcome the government's review, which acknowledges the harm of social media, to take place over 3 months and to report by the summer. I see it as complementary to this amendment, which allows the Secretary of State 12 months to bring forward secondary legislation and for the Secretary of State to determine which platforms should be included. I think the Australian list of 10 platforms is a very helpful starter for 10. But to be clear and to respond to my noble friend Lord Knight, this amendment in subsection 5 allows the Secretary of State to modify, add or exclude regulated user-to-user services. In conclusion, I have had so many parents stop me to say, we need to get this through. One young person approached me on my computer the other day to say, please keep going, we need this change. Another one from Manchester, as parents, we are desperate. Please do whatever you can to protect our youth who are drowning in mental health crises due to the impact of social media. Another mum implored, it's too late for my kids, but we need a ban for the younger ones. We have to do something to ensure that no other child goes through what mine has. Sometimes, my lords, we have to say enough is enough and that we can't wait any longer. The alternative is that in the quest for perfection, we lose the good. And in doing so, we condemn thousands more children to harms, ignoring the change that we desperately need to see.
My lords, I have absolutely no desire to stifle debate, but can I ask anyone who wishes still to speak to be very mindful of the number of votes that we are expecting at the end of this group, and we have very important dinner break business scheduled for tonight. Can we please be brief to the point so we can move on with this important debate?
My lord. I have 2 original points to make to contribute to this debate that I have not been covered at all. But very briefly, I think we should bring ourselves back to the fact that there's an enormous amount of agreement around this chamber. I think everyone will say we feel the most enormous sympathy for the families, some of whom who are here today who've lost families as a result of a contact with social media. I think we all accept that we want 16-year-olds on the day of their birthday to be able to stride out into the world confident, capable, ready to step into adulthood. Most of us want to rein in the overwhelmingly powerful digital companies which have been allowed to run wild across the world by political decisions made by adults. And I particularly want to commend the Right Reverend Prelate for naming the spectre in the room of Donald Trump and his tech bro friends, who is a spectre here and is now recorded in Hansard. And I think, the noble lady Baroness Kidron, I think we've got very broad agreement that the Online Safety Act has been a total failure and Ofcom is not delivering what it should be doing. Those are the points of agreement. Where my conclusions drive me are that I would back Baroness Penn's Amendment 91 with some caveats, which I'll get back to, but it's not my intention to vote for any of the ban amendments that we have before us today. I've got a great deal of sympathy with the Lib Dems' really brave effort to find a way through a middle road, and Baroness Kidron almost swayed me that we should make a gesture. But the case I put to you, argument 1, is that your Lordship's house is not the right place. We are not the right people to be making this decision. Many of us have joined us since the depths of COVID, but those who were here during COVID will remember when the house went largely remote and lots of people who had never used a computer before were suddenly on Zoom, and we met their grandkids. There you are, Granny. You're off mute now. I invite your Lordship's house to look around, to look at the people around you. And so we are extraordinarily unrepresentative of the country in many ways, but we are particularly unrepresentative of the country in terms of age. And this is where I draw on the argument made by the Noble Lord Russell, but come to a different conclusion. I was also in the Learning Centre. I also spoke to some of those same pupils, and they overwhelmingly said, we do not want a ban. Now, what my argument is that we must stop doing politics to young people. We have to give young people agency. We have to give them a sense of control. We have bequeathed to them a disastrous, damaging world, and failing to give them a say in this is absolutely the wrong way forward. And on that point, I have a serious proposal to put to the Noble Lady the Minister. The consultation, will this include, is the government prepared to include a People's Assembly, a representative around the country group of young people, to not just tick a box in a survey, we all know what happens with yes or no votes, but to actually have the chance to deliberate about how they think we could control the future, could improve their situation. Now, my second point, and I think this is something that, second point, it's not been said before, it's really important. We've heard a huge amount of scapegoating of social media in this debate. Social media is a mirror. Social media reflects the misogyny, the violence, the racism, the fake news that's right across and through our society. It's not created. If we could just wave a magic wand and get rid of all of this social media, get young people off social media, young people will still be affected by the dreadful levels of poverty, the schools that are exam factories that put them under tremendous pressure and subject them to unbearable discipline. They'll still have parents who are struggling to put food on the table, keep a roof over their head. They will still encounter all of that misogyny and racism in our society. So when we're debating this and thinking about voting this, we have to understand that social media is a mirror. It's not creating where we are now.
My Lords,
I wish to speak briefly about the issue of scientific evidence, or the lack of it, for Amendment 94A in the name of the Noble Lord Nash. No one disputes that the rates of suicide, depression, anxiety, self-harm have increased amongst teenagers in the last decade. But the question before us is whether social media banned for under 16s would decrease those rates. I know this has been raised by Noble Lady Baroness Cass, but I still believe that randomised controlled trials evidence is important, even in this context. My Lords, there have been no randomised controlled trials, no RCTs of social media bans or restrictions for healthy under 18s. Now, of course, the lack of experimental evidence in adolescent populations may be because it's difficult to manipulate experimentally social media use in such an age group. There is one RCT of 220 adolescents and young adults aged 17 to 25 years with pre-existing emotional distress who were asked to reduce their social media use to 1 hour a day for 3 weeks. However, the sample participants were selected to all be experiencing at least 2 of 4 symptoms of depression and anxiety, and they should therefore be classified as a clinical sample, not a representative sample of the general population. There is an RCT with adolescent participants from which we can learn, even though it's not started, which will take place in Bradford, funded by the Wellcome Trust, for adolescents between the ages of 13 and 16. The intervention will not be a ban, but will involve a smartphone app that limits the use of social media apps using, and this is important, a co-produced combination of a daily budget, 1 hour per day, and a nighttime curfew between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. The co-production of the trial is very important. We need to hear the voice of young people when designing these interventions. They themselves are very concerned by the negative impacts of social media. The feedback from the teenagers in Bradford schools was that, perhaps not surprisingly, they would be against a ban, but they will be willing to accept significant time limits on their use of social media. And so from April onwards, 4,000 students in years 8, 9 and 10 will be recruited from 10 Bradford secondary schools by a team led by Dr. Dan Lure from the local NHS Trust and Professor Amy Auburn from the University of Cambridge, who's recognised as an international expert on the links between mental health and digital technology use in adolescence. The trial will explore the effects of the intervention on all participants, but there will be a subgroup focusing on those with pre-existing symptoms of anxiety. Full analysis of the outcome data will unfortunately not be available until early summer 2027, when results briefings will be available to policymakers. However, through serendipity, we have the largest before an event study taking place in Australia as a result of the ban that the Australian government introduced in December. Before and after studies provide the lowest level of evidence for the effectiveness of healthcare interventions. But if the ban, blunt and imperfect an instrument as it is, does lead to a reduction in suicides and or major mental health issues for children between the ages of 11 and 16, then it will be morally wrong not to introduce such a ban in this country. Australia's e-safety commissioner has appointed an advisory group of 11 distinguished experts, led by Stanford University Social Media Lab, and including from this country, Professor Auburn from Cambridge and Professor Etchells from Bath Spa University, to provide a robust and transparent evaluation of the outcomes of the social media ban in Australia for under 16s. Will the noble lady, the Minister, in her reply, give an undertaking that she will report back within 12 months of the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Act being passed, with an expert analysis of the impact of the Australian ban on key mental health statistics? I do not believe that we should introduce a ban in this country without some impartial analysis, even preliminary analysis, of the data being collected in Australia. Amendment 94A makes no provision for the analysis of the most relevant evidence we will have within 12 months, and I therefore cannot support it.
My Lords, my Lords, my Lords, my Lords, I will too endeavour to be brief. Like many of those of us who have spoken already, I spent a very large amount of time on the Online Safety Act, and I agree entirely with the comments of the Noble Lord Knight, the Noble Lady Baroness Kidron and the Noble Lord Russell. This is a cry of pain, of anger, that I really hope that the Noble Lady the Minister is hearing in this House. But I do not think that banning social media for under 16s is the right thing to do. There are two reasons I'd just like to add that have not been discussed so far. The first one is that I actually worry that by implementing a ban, absolutely nothing will change. We do already have a minimum age. It's called 13. Go into any primary school and you will find how effective that is. So I would urge the Noble Lady the Minister to tell us what are we going to do to actually implement the minimum age that we already have. How is she going to stiffen the backbone of Ofcom to actually hold tech companies to account? Otherwise, we can legislate all we like, and it won't make any difference at all. Secondly, I have huge respect for the eloquence with which my noble friend Lord Nash sets out the horrors and harms that social media is undoubtedly doing. But I would just like to point out one flaw in his argument. He quotes a lot of research that points to the harm that excessive use of social media has on children. A ban is zero use. And I do think we have to be very, very careful about that it is part of the modern world. It does bring good as well as ill, and it's abdicating responsibility simply to ban it. And that takes me finally, I worry hugely that we are letting the tech companies off the hook. We have to hold them to account to produce products that are age appropriate. We've done that in every other technology as it's grown up over the centuries, and we shouldn't duck the issue now. which then takes me to the Right Reverend Prelate's point of what does seem like quite a long time ago. I am in the same dilemma, because I'm absolutely certain that change has to happen, that the Online Safety Act is not working in the way that those of us who worked so hard on it envisaged, that Ofcom is not delivering, and I really doubt that more consultation solves that problem. But I am really worried about passing this baton back to our colleagues at in the other place. I'm worried because a ban on social media has a really nice ring to it. I'm worried when I hear Ian Russell say we must not use our children as a political football. We must really work out what the right answer to this problem is. So I would ask the noble lady, the Minister, not only to listen to this really quite emotional debate tonight. For those of us that worked on the Online Safety Act, I tell you there are about 100-fold more people in this chamber now than there were at any stage of the Online Safety Bill, which shows how much we all care about it now, not just that everyone's waiting for a vote. So please would she hear the concern, the fury, the need to act. But my goodness, if we do send this back to the other place, I really do hope it won't then translate into a blanket ban on social media for under-16s. It will translate into proper action to make the internet a better place for our children.
I think the House should draw...
Go ahead.
No, sorry. With respect, everyone else has had the opportunity to speak. No one from my party has had the opportunity to speak. I want to make just some remarks. Look, I think the House should draw a level of unity from the fact that, despite the fact there are a variation of solutions that are being provided by these amendments, there are common threads that run between them, which is, I think, a common acceptance of the level of crisis that we're facing for our young people, and I think a common desire to provide greater levels of protections for our young people. Now, on the competing, I think, and well-argued cases for the competing amendments, I am more persuaded towards Lord Nash's amendment at 94A, which I believe is cleaner, clearer and bolder. But nevertheless, whatever amendment that we do settle upon, I would agree with others that the one thing we cannot afford to do as a House tonight is to prevaricate. I cannot put myself in the minds of the government, and so therefore, in terms of the consultation, I cannot determine whether this is a very sincere attempt to engage very seriously with this issue, or, as been suggested by Baroness Kidron, some sort of cynical device to get past the problems internally within the Commons. But there are clear problems with the consultation. First of all, that it doesn't produce any guaranteed outcome, and I think there is a concern of a lot of us that over a prolonged period of time, the muscle of the big tech companies will adjust that to water down whatever is coming forward. And it does not produce swift results. We do not know a time frame that ultimately will lead to implementation. And the longer that we delay, the more harm that is caused to children. We should always be reluctant to ban, to restrict where possible. But I think when we are looking at the protection of children, we have to make a level of exception to that. And I think the case for action now is overwhelming. During the Online Safety Act, one of the most moving and significant meetings that I attended was one hosted by Baroness Benjamin, where she brought in families of children who had died as a result of various online harms. And there was a common thread that for a lot of those families, they had become victims because of social media. And whether that was issues around self-harm, suicide, sexploitation, bullying, or a range of other things, there is a very major danger that is out there. The tsunami that we are facing, the gathering tsunami in terms of mental health amongst our young people, I perfectly acknowledge did not start with social media, but it has been exacerbated by it, and we need to take action against it. And even below that level, we are faced with a generation which, I read someone put it as a zombification of our young people. Now, no one, I think, is suggesting in this debate that any solution that we produce is going to be entirely a panacea or will be 100% watertight in being effective in its nature. But if we take that approach to its logical conclusion, as indicated by Baroness Berger, we would simply have no restrictions on young people on any subject or any harm, and I think we do need to grasp the nettle. So I would say in conclusion, I think there's a stark choice before us tonight. We can either embrace, I think, what is the clarion call of the overwhelming majority of parents on this issue and take bold, decisive action to protect our young people, or we can kick the can down the road and neglect the duty that we have to those young people. I hope the House chooses the former tonight.
Front bench.
My Lords, I have a number of amendments in this group. I wish to speak to 108, 110A, briefly on Baroness Penn's Amendment 91 and briefly on Lord Nash's amendment. I want to start by thanking the thousands, hundreds of thousands of parents, mums and dads, grandparents, single parents, teachers, etc., who have kick-started this campaign. While politicians have not been able to get action, they have swung into action. And you talk to any MP of any party in this Parliament and they will tell you that they've received hundreds of thousands of emails and letters. I was talking to our digital lead MP, Victoria Collins, and she told me in the last 3 days alone she's had 1,500 pieces of paper about this. And why? Because parents do not trust us to do anything. They were promised, of course, with the online safety bill that we would see a new world. And they look round and they actually see nothing has changed. And frighteningly, when I asked the Minister a few weeks ago, tell me, Minister, how many companies have been fined or prosecuted for what they have put online, he did not know the answer. Now, that does not fill us with confidence. Creating a safer future for our children and our grandchildren is at a critical crossroads. Our parents, teachers, experts, and even young people themselves are calling for action. Hearing from real teenagers talking about their experiences online. One teenager said, "I look at my younger brother and I'm so worried about how much he seems addicted to screens. We have to do something about it." Another, "Help, I just can't stop." When doctors discovered that smoking kills, when research showed that seatbelts saved lives, we acted. And today presents an opportunity to take a similar life-saving action. It is clear that everyone here today is strongly committed to this end goal, to safeguarding children and protecting them from the risks of the online world. Parents and children are both telling us they feel powerless in the face of platforms designed to maximise engagement at any cost. We see the evidence mounting in our schools with rising rates of anxiety and depression amongst young people. Consultations that kick the can down the road aren't enough when we face a public health crisis. And so, the question before us is not whether we must act, but how effectively and how quickly we can act. Our approach, tabled under Amendment 94 by the Noble Lord Nash, is a blanket ban. One approach tabled by Lord Nash is a blanket ban on social media for under-16s, as well as many other areas of the internet. I fully support the intent of this approach. Again, we are all here in the same name of children's well-being and decisive action that is needed. But we've heard from over 42 charities and experts, as we've heard, including the Molly Rose Foundation, the NSPCC, Internet Watch Foundation, the Centre for Protecting Women Online, Five Rights. They all have major concerns about this approach. These are the experts. I'm not an expert. You're not an expert. They are the experts. They deal with this every day. And yet they have concerns about this approach. And we can look to Australia and see why. When Australia banned social media for young people, they took an approach similar to Lord Nash's, creating a specific list of prohibited platforms. The result? Within 24 hours of TikTok's ban, the company launched a new platform under a different name, one not on the banned list. More fundamentally, this list-based approach ignores the broader digital landscape, the harms presented in online gaming, which Lord Nash's amendment does nothing about, AI-generated content, and countless other platforms that fall outside these narrow definitions. The need for decisive action is beyond doubt, but action alone is not enough. We also have responsibility to ensure that what we put in place is effective and future-proof. That is why we've tabled Amendment 108. Rather than a blanket ban, we propose a risk-based model that considers the risk of platforms according to the actual harm they pose. Think of how we approach film classification or toy safety. We do not ban all films for children. We rate them. We do not ban all toys. We accept the risks. This amendment applies the same principle to online platforms. Under our proposals, providers must submit a proposed minimum age of access as part of the children's risk assessment, with a default expectation of 16 years for social media services, a ban in another name, because enough is enough. We must take action and put a line in the sand. But importantly, non-social media platforms can propose a different age, higher or lower, if they can provide robust evidence based on clear criteria, the impact on mental health, psychological well-being, the presence of addictive design features like infinite scrolling. Ofcom would assess these proposals against clear standards, and we could require a higher minimum age where there is evidence of greater risk. Not only does this create a powerful incentive for platforms to redesign their services, making them genuinely safer for young people, but it crucially future-proofs our regulatory approach, providing clear standards of harm and therefore age of access. In today's society, new harmful platforms will continue to emerge. Chatbots and AI-generated content will continue to grow more prevalent each and every day, and it is therefore vital that a framework adapts based on harm, not through a game of whack-a-mole, as we've heard, but by trying to define what counts as social media, or by leaving these decisions to a single person. My Lords, I recognise there are different views in this House on the best path forward, and I welcome that debate. What unites us all is our determination to protect children from harm. Amendment 108 offers a framework that commands broad support from numerous child safety experts, because it is evidence-based and built to last to keep our children safe online. The technology will continue to evolve. New platforms will emerge, but the principle at the heart of this amendment will endure, that we assess risk based on evidence of harm, that we hold platforms to account, and we protect our children while preserving their access to the beneficial aspects of the digital world. And this is why Amendment 108 is a solution I believe is more effective. A blanket ban may be the simple option, an understandable phrase, a call to action. I understand that, but the evidence is clear, it can be improved. That is why the Liberal Democrats have been trying to work with the noble Lord Nash. We've tried to reach consensus to highlight the flaws in Amendment 94 and work together to ensure that our children are protected by the best possible legislation.
I must just take objection to that. We had a meeting on Monday. I proposed some proposals. The noble lords went away. I heard nothing. They came back with their amendment. I think that's slightly glossing over the facts.
We must ensure that children are protected online and send a message to the government that now is the time for action, not consultation. As Liberal Democrats, we know children become before politics. We must work together for their safety and future. And I now want to turn to Lord Nash's amendment briefly. First of all, I want to praise and thank Lord Nash for taking this initiative. He deserves a lot of thanks from this House, and he's worked tirelessly to get a solution. I was concerned, Lord Nash, when you said that we'd sort of rushed out a counter-amendment. We hadn't rushed out a counter-amendment at all. When children's charities came to us and expressed their concerns, we wanted to ensure that actually we listened to what they said and we tried to incorporate that in the amendment. And actually, we tried to work with Lord Nash to achieve an amendment that we could both support. But at the end of the day, as I've said in my previous amendment, it is children that are important. And we are more interested not in playing Yahoo politics, not trying to score points. We will support Lord Nash's amendment because we understand, as the Bishop rightly noticed, something has to come back to this House where, as a House, we can work together. I briefly want to turn to... No, because there are amendments in my name. It's front bench, and I've only spoke... Oh, no, 10 minutes. Right. I'm going to speak to Amendment 110A. In speaking of that, we propose that we raise the age for processing personal data in the case of social networking services from 13 to 16. This amendment covers platforms where users create profiles, interact and share content. This amendment would exclude educational platforms used in schools and universities for educational purposes, as well as health services like the NHS, digital platforms and crisis helplines that process data to provide care and support. I believe that raising the age is of vital importance to the well-being of children in this country who must navigate an increasingly digitalised world. Social networking services often use personal data for the purposes of delivering personalised content, such as targeting advertising, curating recommendations. Such things have been condemned by Ofsted as they can have substantial negative impact on children. The algorithms driven content can keep children scrolling for hours, disrupting sleep patterns, physical activity, face-to-face social development. Targeting advertising can also exploit children's vulnerabilities, promoting unrealistic body images as well as exposing them to age-inappropriate products, as highlighted by Baroness Cass. The recommendation algorithms can also create echo chambers that amplify harmful content. Children can be exposed to content such as extreme dieting advice to self-harm material at a developmental stage, when young people are particularly impressionable and not critically evaluate what they are being shown. This amendment is therefore key to children's well-being. The years between 13 and 16 represent a critical window of opportunity where children can be susceptible to the design features that social media platforms employ to maximise engagement. By allowing platforms to harvest and exploit the personal data of 13-year-olds, we're essentially permitting commercial entities to conduct behavioural manipulation on children at their most vulnerable. The mental health crisis amongst young people with rising rates of anxiety, depression, eating disorders can be divorced from the datafication of childhood and the attention economy that profits from it. My amendment is simple, that the age for processing personal data in the case of social networking services be raised so as to provide children with 3 additional years of protection from commercial data exploitation during a critical period of their development. And finally, to Baroness Penn's amendment. Thank you, Baroness Penn's amendment. This is an important amendment. I was going to speak to it, but certain members are heckling, so I'll just say how important this amendment is, and I hope the House will support it.
Well done.
Go.
My Lords, a good speech is a short speech. I will endeavour, and like the noble Lady Baroness Kidron, I've spent most of this debate rewriting my speech because I've tried very hard to listen to what noble lords have said. We have 3 options before us tonight. We have the government option of a consultation, we have the Liberal Democrat option, and we have my noble friend Lord Nash's option as it relates to social media. But just very briefly, before I talk about those 3 options, I would just like to say to my noble friend Baroness Penn, rather than being a warm-up act, I think she gave us a masterclass in how to present an amendment. Again, she made a very well-argued, practical case for her amendment. underlining the importance of shifting norms for very young children at the earliest possible stage and calling urgently for firm action and timing on that action from the government. And like others, we look forward to the Noble Baroness's reply. Returning to the group of amendments that deal with social media use, we have, as we heard, an opportunity before us to end the harm that our children and grandchildren are experiencing as a result of the hours that they spend there. I was going to talk about the merits of my noble friend Lord Nash's amendment, but I think others have done that extremely ably. So I would like to turn to the key differences between my noble friend's amendment and that tabled by the noble Lord Mohammed of Tinsley on behalf of the Liberal Democrats. I think that between Baroness Kidron's fiercely critical comments about Ofcom struggling about a critically undermining implementation and wider failures, combined with the noble Lord Russell's comparison of Ofcom to the tech companies as Dixon of Dock Green to Crocodile Dundee, I think those noble lords have done my job for me. The key element in the Liberal Democrat amendment is that we will give powers to Ofcom and the Children Commissioner to decide which apps are safe or not safe, and whether it's my noble friend Baroness Harding, who may be on a slightly different place in this debate than I am, or many other noble lords around the House, Ofcom is struggling with the powers they were given in the Online Safety Act. The noble Lady Baroness Berger put it extremely well. So do your lordships want to give to a struggling organisation one of the most complicated jobs before us? I would suggest we do not. They, of course, should advise. The Children's Commissioner should advise the government, but they should not be responsible. And I think the second reason they shouldn't be responsible is one of democracy. We have too many recent examples, which your lordships will be aware of, where we have delegated incredibly important powers to unelected and relatively unaccountable officials, however competent they might be, and we should not do that again. Our democracy depends on our colleagues at the other end being given the chance to decide, and Parliament deciding what is appropriate or not for our children, taking advice from every expert that they can draw on, many of whom we have heard from this evening. And thirdly, and I was finding it hard to wait to the end to get to this point, whether it's the noble Lord Blunkett should be not mentioned anywhere near this endless reference to a blunt blanket ban. I was so grateful to the noble Lady Baroness Berger. I was about to read out subsection 5 of my noble friend and the noble lady's amendment. This is not a blanket ban, and I think it is, if I may, irresponsible of those noble lords who kept asserting that once my noble friend had clarified that that was not the case, to keep referring to it as such. And crucially, subsection 2b also gives our government time to learn both from some of the scientific work that is going on and from the Australian approach. So this amendment will add neither in terms of flexibility or future-proofing, but it will dilute democratic accountability, and I think we do that at our peril. Yeah. Turning to the government, I would say that now is the time for leadership on this issue. The proposed consultation and the reproach set out in yesterday's statement with a government amendment at third reading doesn't feel like leadership. We heard tonight we don't need another national conversation. The nation has spoken very clearly about its level of concern, and parents and children will not thank us for further delay. The government argues that views are divided, and we heard tonight the children's charities are split, bereaved parents are split. If we wait for a consensus on this issue, the one thing I am confident of is not a single one of us will still be in your lordship's house. And as Martin Luther King wisely said, a genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a moulder of consensus. And the government needs to get moulding and get moulding fast. Because, my lords, we owe it to our children to act now and protect their childhood. I could cover many other things. There's just one thing I would like to talk about extremely briefly, and that is this point that we're putting pressure, that my Noble Friends Amendment puts pressure on parents and children. I really think it finally aligns commercial incentive with the law. If you lose 25% of your clients, you work out what you're going to do differently to keep them. And the one thing they could do tomorrow is to improve age verification, change the algorithms and make these places safe, and then we can benefit from the apparent opportunities for children that exist online. So I think that argument too, which was less explored, can be rebutted. The Noble Baroness Lady Kidron talked about the actions the government could be taking today to stop some of the harms that children experience online. I don't know why the government's announcement yesterday wasn't the one to announce that they were going to take some of those actions. Maybe we'll get that next week. We live in hope when you're in opposition. But we need to take this step tonight, and I appreciate that the Liberal Democrats argue they've worked on their amendment. I know that my noble friend raised this in second reading. He brought these amendments at committee. The House has had a chance to think about them. He and other colleagues across the House have worked tirelessly on this, and the evidence is absolutely clear of the need to act. There are parents behind me, I can feel them behind me in the chamber tonight, but also all around the country, who've watched their children suffer terrible pain and have suffered unimaginably themselves. There are parents who've spoken out, but there are parents and children who carry their pain in suffering. This is the time to do the right thing, to support my noble friend's amendment.
Yeah. My Lords, it is clear from the debate that we've had this evening that this is an issue about which there is considerable concern, and this government recognises those concerns about the impacts of screen time and of children's online safety, particularly given some immensely troubling cases. So this is a topic of profound national interest. And understandably, also as we've heard today, there are a range of opinions. However, one thing that we're all aligned on is the importance of keeping children safe. And as my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, set out just yesterday in the other place, we are determined to help parents, children and young people to navigate these issues. We know many in this House and the other place have concerns around children's online safety, how much screen time they get, and how this can impact well-being. Rest assured, government hears those concerns, and we are prepared to act to deal with them. I will come to yesterday's announcement of a new consultation looking at how to improve children's relationship with social media. But first, we should recognise the significant action that this government has already taken. The Online Safety Act brought in one of the most robust systems globally, with groundbreaking steps to tackle illegal content and activity and to protect children from harmful and age-inappropriate content. Much discussion today has been, as some have called it, frustration at the extent to which that is being fully utilised. but Ofcom has been prioritising its initial enforcement action against the most egregious harms like child sexual abuse material, self-harm content and children accessing pornography. We do fully expect further enforcement action to come. We have been very clear to Ofcom that they have the government's full backing to take enforcement action. And we have since built on the Act's foundations. First, we made content that promotes self-harm and suicide a priority offence. This provides the strongest protections in the Act to users from this awful content. Last week, my noble friend, Baroness Lloyd of Effrith, stood in this chamber and confirmed that we would expedite legislation to criminalise the creation of non-consensual intimate images and that this will be designated a priority offence under the Online Safety Act. Following this, we made intimate image abuse and cyber flashing priority offences. And following that, we have introduced an offence in the Crime and Policing Bill, which will criminalise AI models used to create child sexual abuse material. But we know that there is more to be done. Turning to Amendments 91 and 106, tabled by the noble Baroness Lady Penn, which seek to update the early years foundation stage statutory framework and ensure a public information campaign on screen use by children aged 0 to 5. I agree with the noble Baroness Lady Barran that Lady Penn has prosecuted this case with considerable energy and by bringing evidence to the government. She has engaged well, and the government has taken action. Last week, my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Education, announced that we will publish new practical evidence-informed guidance for parents on early years screen time. Following a review led by the Children's Commissioner and Professor Russell Viner, the new guidance will be published this April and made available to parents through the Best Start in Life website, giving them the clarity and support they're asking for to navigate screen time with their youngest children. The first meeting of their advisory group is tomorrow. As part of this, we're going further still on screen time by developing guidance for parents of children aged 5 to 16, building on the early years guidance already underway. And this will help parents to navigate the issue and support healthy conversations with their children about screen time. We're working closely with the Department of Health and Social Care and the NHS to ensure that screen time guidance and messaging to parents and families is delivered through the most suitable and impactful channels, to ensure that all professionals, including those in the health system, have simple, practical messages to offer parents. We will use multiple routes, extending beyond government channels, to raise awareness of it amongst parent audiences, including, as I say, the Best Start in Life website, designed to provide trusted and supportive information for parents. And of course, we think this new guidance should be available for early years practitioners. We will update the non-statutory guidance to provide further information and emphasis on screen time and outline the considerations around adult use of technology within settings and any implications this has on interactions with children. Where needed, the provider guidance will go beyond the early years screen time guidance for parents, and we will take the next opportunity to incorporate the updated help for early years providers guidance in the early years frameworks. Early years foundation stage frameworks. In addition, the Department is also preparing to review our non-statutory curriculum guidance for early years settings development matters, and as part of this, we will include information on screen time and digital literacy to support early years practitioners and teachers to build and design an effective curriculum. And we are taking more action on appointing an expert panel to inform guidance for the sector on the effective and safe use of digital devices and CCTV. If findings from that review indicate that the requirements within the early years foundation stage need to be strengthened, we will, of course, do so. And on the point about timing, we are able to commit that substantial changes will be made to the early years foundation stage after September 26, but we will do this as soon as possible and no later than April 2027. So the provisions of the Online Safety Act have set the foundations, and we're taking further immediate action with new screen time guidance to support parents and practitioners of early years children. But we've always been clear that we will continue acting to protect children online and their wider well-being. Most debate on amendments today has been on those that seek to regulate children's relationship with social media. Amendment 92, tabled by the Noble Lord Nash on VPN services. Amendment 94A, also tabled by the Noble Lord Nash. And I do accept the points made by Noble Lords that the Noble Lord has prompted considerable debate on this. The Amendment 94B, tabled by the Noble Lord Mohammed of Tinsley. Amendments 108, 109, 110 and 110A, all tabled by the Noble Lord Storey, and Amendment 108 too. It is clear that there is a range of different views on the action that we need to take, even as there is a consensus that action is needed. As many of you will be aware, yesterday the Secretary of State for Science and Technology announced that we are taking further action still, because keeping children safe online is a top priority for the government. We will launch a short, sharp consultation on how to improve children's relationship with social media. This will be a 3-month consultation, with the government reporting back in the summer. We're determined to help parents, children and young people deal with these issues, with a lasting solution that gives children the childhood they deserve, enhances their well-being and prepares them for the future. As we've seen play out in this debate today, while there is consensus that a problem remains, there is a difference of opinion in how children's relationship with social media and screen time should be further tackled. This is shown, as several Noble Lords have identified, by some of the most prominent voices in this field, believing that a social media ban is not the right answer. This is exactly why we are consulting on this matter. As the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology stated yesterday, this is not about if we should act, it is about how we should act. The consultation will seek views on a range of measures on many issues that have been raised. Determining the right minimum age for children to access social media, including exploring a ban for children under a certain age, exploring ways to improve the accuracy of age assurance, and reviewing if the current age of digital consent is the right age. It will also include reviewing children's use of VPNs and how these can circumvent online safety protections. It will be accompanied by a national conversation. It's centring the voices of parents, children, those with lived experiences and people who work closely with children across the public sector. We will ensure to capture voices from across society, including the most vulnerable. And rest assured, we intend to move quickly on this. As I say, it will be a 3-month consultation, with government reporting back in the summer. And to reassure the House, as the Secretary of State set out clearly yesterday, we want to act on this. We have had constructive conversations with Noble Lords about these issues, and we're keen to continue those conversations ahead of third reading in order to find a way forward in this bill that allows action to be taken following the consultation, and if necessary, to bring forward an amendment at third reading to enable the Secretary of State, through secondary legislation, to deliver the relevant evidence-based outcomes of the consultation. So, as I've set out, the question is not whether the government will take further action. We will act robustly. The question is how to do this most effectively. And I hope that this will reassure Noble Lords of the government's intention and that Noble Lords will feel able to withdraw their amendments in this area. But finally, I will turn to Amendments 93 and 110B, tabled by the Noble Lord Nash and the Noble Lord Storey. Amendment 93 would require any device sold in the UK to be preloaded with technology to prevent the recording, sharing and viewing of child sexual abuse material, and 110B to prevent the creation, distribution and possession of child sexual abuse material. I acknowledge Noble Lord's intention to protect children through these amendments, and I want to be clear that the government shares the ambition to protect children from nude imagery and to prevent the spread of child sexual abuse material online. That is why, in the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, we have made clear that we want to make it impossible for children in the UK to take, share or view nude images. But we must get this right. And that's why last week my colleagues and I were pleased to meet with the Noble Lord, Lord Nash, and his colleagues and representatives from British safety tech company SafeToNet to discuss the practicalities of those measures. And ministers and officials from the Home Office and DCIT are continuing this dialogue with tech companies over the coming weeks. As a government, we are committed to this objective and implementing effective solutions that stop the spread of child sexual abuse material. Regarding 110B specifically, this amendment duplicates provisions in the Online Safety Act, which already requires service providers to risk assess, mitigate and proactively prevent users from encountering child sexual abuse material on their service. And the Act will also require services to report child sexual abuse material they find on their service to the National Crime Agency. My Lords, the Government has shown the willingness, the desire and, importantly, action in going further on issues relating to child's online safety and wider well-being with screen time. The Online Safety Act, its enforcement, early years and older children's screen time guidance, the consultation, national conversation and the VOG strategy demonstrate this. Rest assured, we will continue to act as Noble Lords have asked for today to keep protecting our children. There is nothing more important and this government is determined to deliver on that.
My Lords, I will be brief. My only plea to Noble Lords as we take this issue forward beyond today's debate in the Chamber, as I have no doubt that we will, is that we keep the interests of our very youngest children in mind. If we think that companies and the regulator take this seriously, how can it be that the proportion of 3 to 5-year-olds using social media has risen from 1 in 4 to nearly 40% in just 2 years since the Online Safety Act was passed? And if the fact that 1 in 5 2-year-olds is spending 5 hours a day on a screen on average is not a call to arms, I don't know what is. On my Amendment 91, I welcome the commitments from the Government. The gap is now small, indeed it narrowed by a further few months during the course of this long debate, and I will hold them to account for delivering on it. But on that basis, I beg leave to withdraw my Amendment 91.
Is it your Lordship's pleasure that the amendment be withdrawn? Amendment is by leave withdrawn. Amendment 92, already debated. Moved. The question is that Amendment 92 be agreed to. As many of that opinion will say content. Content! To the contrary, not content. Not content. The question will be decided by a division, and I will remain standing until voting is open. Voting is now open. Clear the bar.